開けるんだ開くのさその不思議な扉を登れるんだ登るのさ未来に触れるその心炸裂のドミノ節消えてゆく皆の命愛してる女性に裏切られ白涙が宇宙にさまよその行方さえも知らぬただただ自由に漂う登れるんだ登るのさ未来に触れるその心今私の遠い技熱く燃える遠い技正義の証遠い技敵を落とせ遠い技我らの遠い技
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to peer into the delightfully deranged mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki with our TOMINO-THON. Last week on the show, we talked all about the Invincible Superman, Zambot 3, and today we're here to talk about an Invincible Steel Man, a Muteki Kojin. That's right, it's 123 Daitarn 3!
Indeed it is, and this is an episode that you guys are hearing a week after the last one, and we are recording much more than a week after the last one, because just the world's been crazy for us, and, at least we had the lovely antics of one Mr. Haran Banjo to sole us during these troubled times.
Yes, this was, as you say, for listeners at home, it's not going to be any different. But for us, I think this is the most delayed a single podcast recording has been for good reasons. This always happens with some kind of podcast at the beginning of when the school year starts, because we're both teachers. But yes, this was a particular one of like, we can do it? We can do it. Oh, maybe we can't do it. Maybe we did. And then finally we're here to talk about the Daitarn.
Yes, and, despite the length it's been, we haven't really talked off the air about what we thought of this, so, just right off the top, what did you make of this show, Sean? I think you were more into it than I was.
Yes, I like this show quite a bit. It's a weird show. It is, like, the most unconventional of the Tomino shows I've seen, in terms of, like, it's the least Tomino. But I also think it's, like, the show he needed to make as a series director before he could make a Gundam. I think if you look at the lineage from Triton of the Sea, Zambot 3, obviously there's half of writing in there, but we didn't watch that. But if you kind of look at that lineage and you see, okay, here's him developing as a creator, you can see him building a lot of the kinds of stylistic choices he makes, a lot of the thematic choices he makes, but there's a certain, I think, rigor of the series direction that is missing for both those shows, that making a Daitarn 3, which is unconventional because it's a purely episodic show. There is a very, very slight overarching plot line that is only touched on directly in a handful of episodes, most notably in the last episode. But other than that, it's a truly episodic show like a Lupin III, like a Dirty Pair. It's a one of those. And I think that there's something very fascinating about seeing him as an early series director having to sort of wrangle with, okay, how do you actually do the structure of an episodic show? How do you play with the format of this kind of show? How do you write characters for this kind of show? And I think it is a sort of an oddity in his career, but it's a really fascinating one to see him develop a lot, because I think especially over the course of Daitarn 3, I think you see the show get substantially better and better and better as it goes along. While never ending up being some sort of masterpiece. I don't think this is a show that, unless you're a diehard Tomino fan, that you need to go back and watch. But as a diehard Tomino fan, I do find it quite fascinating.
I basically agree with all of that. I think my personal, critical take is that there's a lot in this show I like, and I wish I liked the show itself more. I consistently felt myself thinking that. It's the only mecha show I've ever seen that I genuinely think would be better if the mecha wasn't in it. Like, I think, like, the Daitarn itself is one of the, like, nooses around this show's neck a lot of the time, and there may be a reason why when Tomino did novels of this show, he didn't include the mech in it. Like, I think there's a reason for that. But I very much agree with you, because one thing that is immediately noticeable with Daitarn 3 is that it's fucking gorgeous. Like, its animation, it's better and it's more consistent than Zambot. It's better and more consistent than OG Gundam. Like, because, like, maybe not early Gundam where Yoshikazu Yasuhiko was able to, like, work on all of it, but certainly, like, you know, Daitarn never reaches a point where, like, later Gundam did where, like, you know, the movies needed to go reanimate a lot of that, right? Like, it's very consistent. It's, like, very well done on that level. And I agree that it definitely gets stronger as it goes along. I know, like, you agree with this because you highlighted which episodes you thought were best, and there's a sequence in the middle starting, like, after the first core, probably, like, around episode 14, where they're pretty much hitting every episode for, like, that second core is, like, really good. And I think it builds and builds, and then I think the finale, that episode is a masterpiece. That finale is fucking phenomenal. And there's something surreal about so much of Daitarn 3 feels like Tomino not phoning it in. He's doing good work, but he's not doing his own thing. He's not doing his own authorial touch the way he did in Zambot. But you start seeing him plant those seeds. And then I think the finale of Daitarn is the most Tomino episode he had directed up to this point. Yes. Like, if you look at everything we've seen of him pre-Gundam, the finale of Daitarn 3 is the most, like, blueprint for the career of the guy we know now of anything he'd made. And I think it's really fascinating that that comes out of this of all shows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I 100% agree that, yeah, I think the finale is amazing. And it's funny because I held off on watching the finale for a very long time as we are getting ready to do the podcast, because I was in charge of the notes for this one. So I watched most of Daitarn 3 relatively early on in the kind of process of producing this episode. But then, you know, you had a lot of stuff going on with your job that meant we had to delay. So I didn't want to watch the end of the show and then wait a week or two to actually record the thing. So I held off on the last two episodes for a very long time. And then I watched them Friday night, so 2 nights ago. And I was just kind of stunned by just how good it is and how much, like, it is a very episodic show that is not doing much with its overarching plot line, but there is an overarching plot line and there is an idea there. There's an idea for, like, who Haran Banjo is as a character. There's an idea for his relationship with the Meganoids and his father and all of that is embedded in the show, that, like, it's shocking how effective that last episode is in finding a heart that does kind of tie together the central threads of the show in a way that I was not expecting, because I didn't think there was much of a central thread there to be pulled on. But when you get to the very end, it's like, no, he did really have, I think, a very clear vision for what Daitarn 3 was about. I think he struggled in certain stretches of the show to figure out how do you make the episodic episodes relate to that all the time. But there is just such a power to the conclusion of this show that makes it very fascinating. It's one of the things that just makes it a very strange show, because these kinds of episodic shows, like a Lupin, like a Dirty Pair, don't have those kinds of finales, because that's just not the kind of shows that they are. And so there is something interesting about Daitarn 3 having, you know, almost no serialized plot line at all, and then at the very end, it finding some sort of heart to the series that it can pull on to get to a very Tomino climax. Like, it's a super Tomino style ending that is very reminiscent of things like the end of Turn 8 Gundam. It's reminiscent of the end of, like, Char's Counterattack, and the way it leaves things, like, hanging and kind of unresolved in a very interesting way. It leaves the characters at arm's length in a way that is very Tomino, that you're, like, struggle to kind of unravel what's going on there. And it is, for all the kind of oddities of the show all the way through, the climax sort of puts it all into perspective in a way that's very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, my experience watching this show is and look, some of this is just that I've had a rough couple of weeks, and, you know, this always happens on the podcast. Sometimes, Sean, your life is busy in a way where we have to delay things. Sometimes it's mine. And so I wasn't always in the mood for Daitarn 3. But, like, even when I was in the mood, my frequent experience with this show is that I would enjoy lots of parts of episodes, but I would feel pretty burned out by the end of an individual episode because I didn't feel it like coming together in a way that was super engaging. But then that finale is so good, it kind of made me want to go back and just rewatch the thing from the beginning and like pay attention to it in a different way because, as you say, the vision it presents at the end is so clear. And that does make it an interesting piece of art because I don't think that vision is there at the beginning. Like, I don't think,
No.
I mean, you don't even know Haran Banjo's really, really, really important backstory until after the first core. Like, it's crazy how threadbare some of that is at the beginning versus at the end. But that is, I mean, for the purposes of a podcast like what we're doing here, that's really interesting.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So yeah, Daitarn 3, it's a strange show, but I do love it. Like, I love it in its own very weird way. And I did have a fun time going through and putting together the notes. And because, Jonathan, the process of finally recording this podcast was so belabored, I did end up getting a couple things in that I ordered a while ago. I ordered some books from Japan to help me with the research stuff, which did help clarify a couple of the bullet points on this show, because there were some things about its production I was confused by. So I bought a book called Tomino Yoshiyuki no Sekai, or The World of Tomino Yoshiyuki, which is a book built out of a museum exhibition that was done for his works in like 2019, 2020. And it's a very cool book that has pictures of like storyboards and production notes and stuff like that, and interviews with Tomino and other people involved with the shows. It's got like just the general kind of critical breakdowns of the various works for Tomino Yoshiyuki, and it covers everything in his career, which is very nice for a podcast that we're doing that covers everything in his career. And then I bought another book that is a more book that is called Tomino Yoshiyuki Don, or On Tomino Yoshiyuki, which is by the anime critic Fujitsu Ryota, that is a similar just kind of breakdown of his overall career. And then I also, because I was not planning, those other two I was planning on buying because it came up in a YouTube video I watched forever ago. I was like, we're doing a podcast on this shit. I should buy these books because I can read Japanese well enough at least to do this. When I put it in my cart, there was and people who have ordered this also ordered this thing popped up. And so, Jonathan, I ordered a reprint of the infamous Mobile Suit Gundam Char's Counterattack fan club book edited by Anno Hideaki, because there was a redone version of it that has some of the most infamous Tomino quotes of all time are contained in the annals of this thing in his interview with Anno and a couple of other people. So I have spent a lot of money importing those from Japan. So I'm very serious about our Tomino-THON.
Well, that's fucking awesome. I did not know about the reprint of that, because that doesn't happen that often, of you have these old magazines that get reprinted. So that's really cool. I'm excited to hear some of the crazy quotes from that one.
Yes, well, eventually when we get to Char's Counterattack, I'll have to go dig into that thing. But yes, this is... I don't have like a giant amount of notes on Daitarn 3, but I feel very confident about the veracity of the notes on Daitarn 3 because I have them verified from like 5 different separate sources now.
Well, then let's dig in. I want to hear about it, because I'm guessing the story behind this show is just as, if not more interesting than the story of this show.
Yeah, it's definitely, as with all these old shows, it is a long belabored process to try to put this thing together. So Daitarn 3, the show that we know as Daitarn 3, originally started life as a project called Bomber X. And that was originally going to be a 3-stage transforming robot, kind of like your Getter Robo or Zambot 3. Notably, the Daitarn 3 itself ends up not being a 3-robot thing, so I don't know why it's called Daitarn 3. I guess they just like the name. But the original...
It's so that Sean, at the very end of the show, Garrison can tap his foot and go, 1, 2, 3, and we can all go, ah! Yeah.
Yep. That is probably why. But it was originally going to be a 3-stage transforming robot called Bomber X, and this would have been Sunrise's first anime. So Bomber X was supposed to be made before Zambot 3. But Bomber X ultimately fell apart as a project because the planned sponsor for that show, which was the toy company called Bullmark, that company went bankrupt in October of 1977. And if your main sponsor goes bankrupt, you're kind of fucked because you have no money. So Bomber X kind of died on the vine, and that project went aside. And then there was this other project, Invincible Superman Zambot 3, that they were also planning on making. Because keep in mind that all of these shows are just running constantly, right? So it's like in the same way that when we get to talking about Gundam on the next episode, all the pre-production of Gundam is happening while Daitarn is also happening because all these shows are just running sequentially. So Zambot 3 ends up going forward. Zambot 3 airs first, so Zambot 3 becomes the first proper Sunrise original anime. And then Bomber X gets revitalized into a new show called Zambot 3 that is revitalized in part because the toy company Clover, that was the main sponsor for Zambot 3, liked the success that Zambot 3 was having, and they're like, let's do another one. And so Bomber X was brought back from the grave and transformed into what we now know as Invincible Steel Man Daitarn 3, or Iron Man Daitarn 3, however you want to translate the title. The ultimate pitch for this series was to create something in a very different direction than Zambot 3, right? Zambot 3 is a really kind of like aggressive show that is pushing against the audience's expectations. It's trying to challenge what the audience assumes about these kinds of series, a thing that Tomino was obviously very fixated on in his early career, and really his whole career. But at this particular point, the Triton of the Sea ending that he like sort of jammed through became like the whole vision for Zambot 3. But Daitarn 3 was something meant to be more as a simple form of entertainment, like simple, pleasurable entertainment was kind of the main pitch. And in this book, Tomino Yoshiyuki no Sekai, or The World of Tomino Yoshiyuki, there's a printing of one of the early pre-production documents they got their hands on from Tomino, and it's like an internal memo of him kind of like talking up the idea of the show, and it's basically described as, quote, a brand new robot series. We will focus on everything on this concept. It won't be like any series or robot series before it. That is to say, we will create a work that both appeals to the sensibilities of the young adult man, or sei shonen is the word they use there, while creating a world that is easily understood by young children. What will support that is mechanic animation drama entertainment, which is like, it's like drawn as like a pillar of mechanic animation drama in one column, and all that's like an arrow to entertainment. So it's mechanic entertainment, animation entertainment, drama entertainment. And so this idea is to like hit a broader demographic of both young kids will be able to enjoy the show, but also young adults will be able to enjoy the show based on some of the influences, which we'll get into. And then there's another sort of thing he puts at the end of that memo where he says, simply we're creating a, quote, mechanic entertainment or mecha entertainment, but they use the word mechanic, which I like because it sounds goofy and it's very old.
It sounds like something that would play on the TV in your mechanic shop when you're waiting in their like sweaty waiting room while they're changing your car's oil or something. That's mechanic entertainment.
Yeah, but it just shows you how old this is, that we're in the 70s, that it's like just abbreviating it as mecha is not the kind of like preferred method. It's still just mechanic entertainment. So we're creating a mechanic entertainment show which won't go beyond simple entertainment, which I like. It's like we're not going beyond simple entertainment. We're stopping there. The three pillars of the production, which we must never forget, are exhilaration, humor, and pathos. And so that was the sort of internal pitch for the show.
It does kind of sound like Tomino self-flagellating over Zambot. Like, I promise, no suicide runs, no, protagonist crying on the beach at the end because everyone he's ever known and loved is dead. None of that. No. Nothing beyond simple entertainment, which I think he does break a little bit by the end of Daitarn, but not to the level he did in Zambot.
Yes, and like the reasoning for some of this, which I kind of have in a later note, but just to bring it up here, is he basically wanted to be able to make a show that would run for an entire year. Because that's what these shows are supposed to do, really.
Yes.
And neither Triton or Zambot 3 were continued for long enough to be for an entire year. Now, Daitarn 3 isn't either, but it does go for 40 episodes. So it's the longest show he directed up to this point. He doesn't get a full 4-course show until Combat Mecha Bungle in like 82 or 83.
It's 82, yeah.
And so, like, that's one of his reasoning is, like, I want to be able to create a show that will actually be able to go for the full 4 cores that it's, like, originally designed to go for. And he gets pretty damn close with this one. And so that's one of the reasons why he kind of makes this move.
We also did talk about on the Zambot episode that there was a gap between the airing of Zambot and Daitarn where they re-aired a bunch of Zambot. And I'm betting, and I think they aired about 13 episodes of it. So if you, like, kind of add that core in there, that filled in the space of what a year-long production would be. So they at least had something on the air to like pay their staff for a year in this period.
Yes. Yeah, because all these shows are meant to go for a full 4 cores. Like Triton of the Sea was supposed to be a 52-episode show that ended up getting canceled effectively. Obviously we'll talk about this with Gundam and stuff. Like, this is the thing that happened a lot with Tomino. So that's a part of the motivation for making this kind of like, we're not going to go beyond simple entertainment. That's where we stop. In following with the pitch, Tomino, while he did create an elaborate backstory, and some of that's detailed in this book, where he has like, in one iteration of the show that's called like The Big Guardian or something like that, before it becomes Daitarn 3, he wrote this big document that details Hadan Banjo's entire backstory with his dad and how the Meganoids are created, how the Daitarn, or at that point it was called the Guardian, was created, and all this stuff. He builds this whole big kind of lore for the show, but he doesn't put it really in the show other than briefly hinting at it in various places, and obviously becomes an important element in the climax of the show. So it's like he did kind of create a big elaborate, almost like lore Bible for the whole thing, and clearly had a bigger vision for the larger story in his head, but intentionally did not insert that into the actual show, avoiding creating the serialized story overarching plotline style of Triton of the Sea or Zambot, and instead creating a purely episodic show. Part of this concept was also to blend this super robot style show with elements of Kamen Rider, which are obviously very popular still around this time, including putting on live action superhero shows. So this is like, you know, people dressing up as characters from the show and doing little live events at like shopping malls and things like that, which was super popular at this time with various things, because it's also around the, you know, Super Sentai, all that kind of stuff. Unlike Zambot 3, the production of the toy merchandise for this show preceded the show. So the toys were available before the show actually aired. And this is obviously a model that starts becoming more and more common and becomes very common in the 80s with stuff like G.I. Joe, Transformers, etc. But Daitarn, it was before the show aired, they already had the toys out. And as a result, Daitarn 3 enjoyed a wider, more successful range of merchandise than its predecessor. Ultimately, this whole strategy of how to promote the show and merchandise it was so successful that Clover sold 150% of what they had sold with the equivalent merchandise of Zambot 3. So it was a much bigger success for Clover than Zambot was. One thing that's interesting about the show that you can tell if you watch it is that there are several really significant inspirations for the series of stuff that was popular at the time. And this is something that you can just infer by watching it, but it is actually part of the explicit planning documents that I saw in this book, is that they do note explicitly two reference points, Star Wars and James Bond. That's in that memo I was quoting from earlier. For Star Wars, this is pretty fascinating because you have to break down the timeline of this. So Star Wars itself obviously releases over here in 1977, but it didn't come out in Japan until July 1st of 1978. That's when episode 5 of Daitarn 3 is airing. So Daitarn 3 is coming out when Star Wars is released in Japan for the people making Daitarn to actually watch it. So I was like, well, that doesn't make sense given a couple of clear influence points. For example, you can clearly see Banjo is fighting with a lightsaber in the opening animation, in a scene that doesn't exist in the show. Like in the show, he has a different weapon that is not as lightsaber-ish, but there's like an explicit lightsaber he has in a cut in the opening. And so I dug around to try to figure out what is happening there, and I found a really cool blog from anime critic Hikaru Yusuke. He has an article online called Star Wars in Japan's Tokusatsu/Anime. And basically what was going on is that a huge amount of news and media about Star Wars and the effect and popularity it had in America was widely distributed in various magazines in Japan. And so there was lots of production materials from the show that were coming out, lots of like reviews from people from America or translated reviews in Japan. And so there was this fascination with this massive movie that was this like world-altering hit in America. And even some of the merchandise, such as lightsaber toys, were released in Japan before the actual movie came out over here. So this meant that if you were a big science fiction fan in Japan at the time, they sort of you could craft your own vision of what Star Wars was in your mind's eye from the merchandise, from the production stills, all that kind of stuff. And so they had that vision of what the movie was before the movie actually came out. And so that's where you get this very intense Star Wars influence that just becomes bigger in various parts once Star Wars actually comes out in Japan, because you then get some actual visual quotes from it later. One place where you see this influence is in the main sort of antagonist, Don Sauser, who is a vaguely Darth Vader-ish looking character, broadly speaking, this big cyborg man who breathes in this weird way. That breathing sound is much different in episode 2, and then when he comes back in a later episode, it is intentionally designed to sound a little bit closer. It's not like it sounds exactly like Darth Vader, but there's this clear desire to bring it closer to the kind of Darth Vader inspiration of the overall design of the character. And then you've got big specific references, like we'll talk about episode 12, which has a very elaborate extended flashback sequence that has multiple direct visual quotes from Star Wars. And then you also have the very bizarre episode 22, which is your big kind of meta reference episode where they recreate the iconic original poster of Star Wars. That is always, I love that poster because it just resembles so nothing of that movie. Like Luke is like this shirtless, handsome, husky guy holding up his like Excalibur lightsaber, but they do that in the show. So Star Wars obviously will also be a huge influence when we talk about Gundam, where it gets to be more directly an influence because Tomino will have seen Star Wars before the actual making of that show. Or when you get to F91 and they basically just plagiarize the music from Star Wars for that movie. So Star Wars, obviously a huge influence on all kinds of science fiction in Japan and around the world, but you get to see some of its earliest influences in anime here in Daitarn 3, which I think is pretty fascinating.
It's very fascinating, and actually this makes sense because a lot of the visual quotes of Star Wars in Daitarn don't look like the live-action movie that came out in 1977. They look like the concept art and poster art, right? Like, which is fairly different. Like, you can see how that you go from concept art and poster art to what's in the movie. But, like, if you look at, like, various pieces of concept art of Darth Vader or drawings that were done of Darth Vader for, posters and media and stuff, Don Sauser looks more like that than he does like the Darth Vader of the film. And so it's stuff like that that's very fun. Or like the lightsabers. Like the way lightsabers are drawn by Ralph McQuarrie, where the beam comes out much more unevenly and the handle is a little beefier and stuff. That's what the sabers look like in Daitarn 3, like in the opening. They don't look like the sabers in the movie Star Wars. And so that's actually kind of fun to know, because I was thinking about this while watching, but I hadn't gone back, and I had to check the release date of Star Wars in Japan for a different project at one point, but I'd kind of forgotten, and so this makes sense. This is cool.
Yes, very cool. One other explicit reference point for the series is James Bond, obviously also very popular through the 70s, forever since it comes out.
It starts in 62, and so it would have been about 2 decades at this point.
Yeah. So according to one of the main writers for the series, Araki Yoshihisa, for whom he's the kind of the guy who brought the James Bond stuff to the project, he didn't want to simply do a, quote, good versus evil story, but something that was kind of lighter on its feet and had more exhilarating action even when they're outside of the robots. Araki wrote a kind of pitch for a live-action he wrote live-action TV drama series, and he wrote a pitch for one that would have been like a Japanese-style James Bond, but that never got anywhere in live action. So instead, he took some of those ideas and brought it to this project, where in anime, that's much more feasible to do your, big gun action and kind of spy thriller stuff than in live action that's very expensive. You can, of course, see lots of these kind of James Bondish elements throughout the series. There's Banjo's whole deal, right? He's got his kind of upper-class trappings in his mansion and all that kind of stuff. He's got his, I can't claim the character is British because it's a Japanese dub, he must be British, Garrison. Even though his last name is Tokita, it's the most British-looking anime character I've ever seen is Garrison in the show. You've got all the cars and the sports cars and all that kind of stuff. You've got Banjo's womanizing tendencies and the characters Beauty and Reika that are obviously kind of designed in the lineage of Bond girls. So you get this sort of James Bond element and the kind of action thriller stuff. Because one of the things that's interesting about the show is that there is lots of car and gun action and stuff outside of the context of the Daitarn itself. Like, the Daitarn is not the only source of action in the series.
The best action in the show is outside the Daitarn. Like, the James Bond stuff is where, to me, the show comes alive on an action level, and, it's actually very good at it.
Yes, and so that's another interesting element of the influence here. And speaking of Beauty and Reika, there's one other influence here that I just was very thrilled to discover, is that one of the other trends that the show is capitalizing on was the extreme popularity of a certain women's wrestling tag team who are called the Beauty Pair. If you're wondering where Beauty got her beautiful Tachibana, Beauty got her name from, it's the Beauty Pair. And they served as direct inspirations for the two heroines of the show. And I just love to imagine, and it's totally plausible that this is what happened, but I don't know if this is what happened. But I love to imagine the idea that Tomino was at the August 1977 match that we know that Takechi Haruka, creator of Crusher Joe and Dirty Pair, dragged aged British science fiction writer A. Bertram Chandler to, and that is the meeting that inspired the creation of the Dirty Pair. And please tell me Tomino was also there, because he would have known Takechiho. He worked on stuff that Studio Nue also worked on. Obviously, it's like this was just a popular thing at the time, so it's entirely plausible. It's just came from totally different interactions with the beauty pair. But I just love the idea that both of these things happened at the same time in August 1977.
It feels like if you were making the Hollywood-style biopic of Tomino, yes, there would be a scene where this is happening, and like you have those famous characters, and in the corner, while he's listening to them talk about the Dirty Pair, he's like sketching Amuro in his notebook or something like that. And that's what you would do in the biopic.
Yes, but I just love that somehow, I just love the weird intersections and coincidences and what we cover in Japanimation Station, that I was not expecting the beauty pair in my research on that Dirty Pair episode to come in handy for fucking Daitarn 3. It's just not something I would have put together.
Well, I mean, Dirty Pair is a Sunrise show, and while it is not a Tomino production, like, Daitarn 3 is more similar to Dirty Pair than any other mecha anime Sunrise ever did, with or without Tomino. So, like, you do imagine that, like, there are definite moments where I'm like, oh, this feels like a proto-Dirty Pair, not a proto-Gundam or anything like that, right? And Dirty Pair is a better version of what this is, but that lineage is fun to kind of trace.
Yes, absolutely. Then there's one other thing that seems like it could be an influence but was not, which is Batman. It's specifically noted when I was reading through the Japanese Wikipedia page that, like, there's a specific thing where Tomino has been asked multiple times, like, so Garrison's Alfred from Batman, right? And he's like, no, I knew nothing about Batman at the time, which is totally plausible. You know, it's 1977, 1978. Like, I would not assume that Tomino would be, like, way into the Adam West Batman. I don't know what level of traction the Adam West Batman had. But it is funny that there were, like, multiple interviews of people asking him if Batman was an influence on Daitarn. Because it is notable, right? Garrison is very Alfredish. The mansion that Banjo lives in is very... and it specifically does kind of resemble some of the feel of the Adam West Batman. Obviously not as slapsticky as that show was, but just like the big mansion that he lives in and all that kind of stuff. So it's believable that it could be an influence. According to Tomino, it was not. Maybe there was someone else in the production that kind of put that spice in that Tomino is not aware of. But if you're, you know, sitting there thinking Garrison is very Alfredish, according to Tomino, that is just a coincidence.
I totally assumed it was a Batman reference. I think most people would have. I understand how you could arrive at it through those other influences without it being a Batman reference. But, like, to the degree I assumed for a long time in the show that there was more about, like, the relationship between Garrison and Haran Banjo that we would learn, and we really don't, you know, in the way that, like, Alfred and Bruce have some kind of, like, backstory, and that Alfred is, like, a surrogate father, but that's not who Garrison is.
Yes. Yeah, we never, you know, this is like a big thing with this show, is that the details of the setting are very elusive. That's true of, like, kind of all of the characters. But yes, especially, like, Garrison's kind of connection to Banjo is very mysterious. Is never really elaborated on. So that's a lot of the influences and or not influences for the show. And so this overall concept of the show obviously meant that it is much more kind of humor and comic focused than Tomino's previous projects. It's much lighter in tone. It doesn't have a serialized plotline. And Tomino later stated that he struggled with that aspect of the show, particularly with the characters of Beauty and Topo, and that the overall production was designed for him to be more of a quote-unquote job, rather than it being this kind of like passion project the way that Zambot 3 was. Or, you know, I don't think Triton of the Sea was from conceptualization a passion project, because I don't think he gave a shit about that manga. But he turned it into a passion project of, like, this is the first series he was directing. Whereas Daitarn 3 was designed to be like, I want to make a thing that is going to be successful. And so it was a job for him. He stated that he knew, this thing I mentioned earlier, he knew that making a show like Daitarn 3 would allow Sunrise and him to make a show for a whole year, rather than having to be canceled halfway through. But during the process, he realized that he himself would not be able to keep up like this style of production. He would not be able to keep making shows like this, basically. And so the show did not run for its full 4 cours, but it did get your 40 episodes, which was the longest run he had up till this point. In later years, Tomino has had a characteristically inconsistent assessment of Daitarn 3. If you're new to reading interviews with Tomino, take every single thing Tomino says with a very heavy skepticism, because he likes to fuck with people. We will get into that when we get to Char's counterattack in his interview with Anno, where he is very clearly fucking with Anno various points in that interview. And so he has been sometimes highly critical of it in interviews. He has been sometimes extraordinarily affectionate towards it, depending on when the interview was had and his mood at the time. So one example recently from the 2019 box set in Japan. And keep in mind, this is a quote to sell the Blu-ray release of this. This is in marketing promotional material. He said this, and this is his only quote for this thing. Quote, "We were overly serious in a bad way. If we're making simple entertainment, that's not good. If we wanted to make simple entertainment like the original goal, we should have jammed in silly, ridiculous gags, even if it meant going off script or going against the main kind of thread of the story." And that was it. That was the comment he gave, was we were overly serious in a bad way. If we're going to do this, we fucked it up. If we wanted to do it that way, we should have done something different. It was an amazing thing to put in your promotional material for selling the Blu-ray set of your classic anime series from everybody's, favorite anime mecha director. So that's a much more critical, kind of look back on it. In 2003, he has a much kind of more affectionate kind of way of looking at it, where he says, quote, "We were fairly bold with what we were going for, so I'd give it something like 80 points out of 100 even now." So not him saying it's one of my greatest masterpieces of all time, but it's a much more we were going for something very bold and different with it. And I feel as a self-assessment, 80 points out of 100 is quite good if you're someone who has previously, in the promotional materials for a different show, Victory Gundam, said in the promotional materials for the home release to not buy the home release of that show. So that's the scope. It's not like video game reviews where you only use the top end of the scale. Tomino uses the whole fucking scale when he's promoting his shows, because that very scathing quote about Daitarn 3 is not the most negative thing he has said in the promotional materials for the home video release of one of the things he has made before.
Sean, do you think the marketing department at the various home video divisions that release Sunrise Media, do they fear Tomino, or do they think he's our golden bullet because he's going to say stuff so crazy we're going to get press no matter what?
I think it's I bet they gauge it on a per release. I feel for Daitarn 3, they're probably really stoked that they got something that's not just a generic, yeah, Daitarn 3, I loved making that show. Haran Banjo, he was great. It's just very boring quote. They got this who the fuck ever says this shit on promotional materials. I bet when they're trying to release Victory Gundam, I bet there's a little bit more sweating of ooh, this might go the wrong way. Either it gets people so interested, what the fuck is this show that Tomino himself doesn't want people to see, or it's well, if Tomino says it's shit, why would I bother paying good money for it?
Indeed. All right, what else have we got here, Sean?
All right, so that was Tomino's sort of I just love going through interviews with Tomino. So whenever I have an opportunity to see his just incredibly inconsistent quotations he gives in interviews, it's always fun. But that he has a soft spot in his heart for the Invincible Steel Man Daitarn 3, because he did create a set of novels, 4 different novels that are called the Haran Banjo series, which he published from 1987 to 1992. That are nominally, Daitarn 3 novels, but they are not Daitarn 3 novels because the Daitarn 3 is not in it. So it is it's Haran Banjo, it's Meganoids. I think Garrison's in it, but everything else is, as far as I know, is totally different. I obviously didn't read these books. They're not most of them are not particularly easy to find either. But yes, so he, clearly this is a thing that stuck in his head. He's clearly, we'll talk about this later, he was very proud of the name Haran Banjo. He really liked the name Haran Banjo. And so I think that has always kind of stuck with him, at least enough to write more books about it.
I would really like to read those books, because I actually think, honestly, one of my first... Well, when we get into, our critical takes on the show, my number one suggestion would be ditch the giant robot, because I think it's an anchor on this show, and I feel like Tomino knew that too, and so I would be very curious to watch or see or read the version of this that is about Haran Banjo going up against the Meganoids, but not in a big mecha.
Yes, I mean, obviously, the big mecha is there because... they were selling the toys of the big mecha before they made the show, right? But yes, it is clearly not a thing that the show is not invested in the Daitarn 3 in the way that like Mobile Suit Gundam is very invested in the Gundam, or honestly like Zambot 3. I think the design of Zambot 3 is fairly like whatever, but the show cares about the Zambot 3. Like it does not particularly care about Daitarn in this. But you know who does care about the Daitarn is the people of Italy, because Daitarn 3 is a cult hit in Italy, which is an amazing detail because the series was broadcast in Italy as L'Imbattibile Daitarn 3 with an Italian dub, a full Italian dub in 1980 on TV. So this is like more or less like in real time, you know, just like a couple of years later. There is an original version of the theme song that is an Italian theme song that's its own song, and it's awesome. If you have not listened to it, I would just go to YouTube and just type in Italian Daitarn 3 and you will get it. And it is, I think, substantially better than the Japanese one. It doesn't have a guy going 1, 2, 3, Daitarn 3 at the beginning, but other than that, it's just a way better song. And Daitarn 3 is a cult hit such that there are various references to Daitarn 3 in Italian pop culture, such as there's a modern pop punk Italian ska band called Meganoidi, with a sort of single that is also named Meganoidi, where the lyrics of the song, according to me Google translating the Italian lyrics, is written from the perspective of the Meganoids fighting the Daitarn 3, which is just amazing. And then there's also a famous in Italy Italian comic book supervillain character named Don Zauker, which is what Don Sauser was called in the Italian dub. So if you want to get some good Daitarn 3, obviously you could go to Japan. I'm sure there are still fans of Daitarn 3 in Japan. But if you can't get to Japan, you can go over to Italy and go to a Meganoidi concert and get some Daitarn that way. And that is something I think is very delightful.
Well, to the point, Sean, that the torrent I watched of this show was ripped from the Italian Blu-ray, not the Japanese one.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's the same master, but I will say the Italian Blu-ray of Daitarn 3 is a better presentation of the series than any other Sunrise show has on Blu-ray. It is a better restoration. It has less grain reduction, so the show just looks better. Like, if you look at any of the Gundam shows or Zambot 3, they are more denoised than I would prefer. They're not complete hatchet jobs like Funimation doing Dragon Ball Z or something, but like the Italian one looks like a proper film restoration, and it looks really good. And so, yeah, it's very big in Japan. The fan subs I was watching are translated, I believe, from the Italian dub, not from the Japanese, because the person who fan subbed it spoke Italian. And it's clearly a very accurate dub. Like, there are points where, like, obviously the wording is a little different, but not in any way that you would say is, like, offensively wrong or anything. And, like, I'm now looking up torrents because I didn't think to do this, but I was like, could I find a torrent that actually has the Italian dub on there? Because this is one where I would be super curious to go watch at least some of the show in Italian, because I'm guessing it's a very good version of the show because it was so popular, and that would be kind of fun. And this is also like a conversation I've been having with my students I'm teaching a Miyazaki, Hayao, and Takahata Isao class, kind of a Studio Ghibli auteurs class. And one of the things I have to keep pointing out to them as we're going through their like 60s and 70s stuff is like, America got to anime later than most of the rest of the world. People forget this, but like, you know, I was telling them, like, you guys have never heard of Heidi, Girl of the Alps. Every other country on Earth other than the United States and the United Kingdom had heard of Heidi, a Girl of the Alps. Like, that show was huge. It was huge in, like, Arabic-speaking countries, and throughout Europe, and throughout a bunch of Spanish-speaking countries. And, like, and this was a common thing in this era. Anime did travel, it just didn't travel here. And so we have this blind spot for it.
Yes, but you do end up with this interesting, like, you know, it's always fun to see these original shows through like such a different cultural lens. Like, it's just the being an American person looking at the Italian theme song for a Japanese anime is just, yeah, it's very fun. And I just love that there's a fucking ska band themed after Daitarn 3 is like just the best thing in the world. It's amazing. So that's my history notes. Let's get into the people making it. The show was directed by a guy you might have heard of, Tomino Yoshiyuki. He was kind of a big deal. Obviously, we're making a whole podcast about it, so don't need to go further to that. But one thing that's very interesting, if you're a big fan of Sunrise anime, you might notice a credit on here that will be very familiar if you have watched a lot of Sunrise shows, which is an original story credit, which goes to both Tomino Yoshiyuki and another name you might recognize, Yatate Hajime. You might recognize that name, but you might not recognize the person because the person doesn't exist. Yatate Hajime is a sort of pseudonym for the entire staff, effectively, of Sunrise. It's a practice that was happening at the time in Japan in order for these new, like, original anime studios to kind of manage copyright stuff. They created this notion of, like, an original creator that was named after this sort of pseudonym that represented the entire studio. And Daitarn 3 is the first show, it's like the second Sunrise show, and it's the first one to have the Yatate Hajime credit that is now on every original Sunrise production, which is, I think, very cool. The name itself came from a writer working at Sunrise, Kawahara Yoshie, who at the time he was a setting assistant, quote unquote, on Daitarn 3 was his job title. And it's a reference to a Matsuo Basho quote, who, if you don't know who that is, he's one of, like, Japan's most famous poets. If you look up famous Japanese haikus, chances are you're going to see a Matsuo Basho one. And he has this quote, which is, Koryo yatate no hajime toshite, ikumichi nao susumazu, which means this was the first time I used my traveling brush and I was still reluctant to venture further. So it's this, like, quote about, like, the notion of setting out for a new journey and the, like, kind of like that precipice upon, like, do I turn back or do I go forward is kind of what that, like, kind of poem is about. And that's what they used as the creating of this sort of figure, Yatate Hajime, that is on all their shows. And it's always, I think, like a process if you're an anime fan that for a long time you're like, man, who's this Yatate Hajime guy? He's so fucking prolific. He's like, how did a guy who created the story for Gundam also create the story for Love Live School Idol Festival? That seems implausible. And it is, because that's not what happened. This is the first time that name was created.
Yes, and it's definitely a historical milestone to note because we will see it on basically everything else we talk about this season.
Yep, exactly. Character design for this show is interesting because it involves two different people, both of whom are very famous character designers that go on to do really huge projects. Shioyama Norio and Kogawa Tomonori. Shioyama Norio, his sort of biggest other series you would know for especially is Armored Trooper Bottoms, and that whole series. He's the character designer for that. And then Legendary Armor Samurai Troopers, or known as Ronin Warriors over here in the States when that aired on Toonami. He was also the character designer for that, for various other series as well. And Shioyama was generally in charge of, he did all the main characters. So I know 100% for sure, I know he definitely did Banjo and Garrison. I believe he did Topo, Beauty, and Reika as well. I don't have that. I know Banjo and Garrison for sure because it's quoted in this book I have, but I believe just based on the designs, that's true of the other ones. The enemies, and most particularly Kodosu, is designed by the other designer here, Kogawa Tomonori. He is an incredibly prolific animator, animation director, and character designer, and we will see him a lot during our Tomino-THON because he has done other series, including, and this will be very obvious if you've seen Ideon, he's the character designer for Space Runaway Ideon, where Kodos is like a prototype of an Ideon character, basically, in terms of design. He's also the designer for Combat Mecha Zabungle and Or Battler Dunbine. He began as an animator working on Hoshi no Kyojin in 1970, but quickly rose to the animation director position on multiple projects. His first job as a character designer was on a series called Manga Nihon Emaki, and shortly before Daitarn 3, he was the character designer and animation director for the film Farewell to Space Battleship Yamato. He had worked extensively as an animator on the Yamato TV series. And then his other most notable non-Tomino work as a character designer is as the character designer chief animation director for Galaxy Express 999. So a very big name in the history of anime, one who's here for, again, like very clearly the character designer for Kodosu. Like when we watch Ideon, it will be very obvious that there's like a direct connection between Kodosu and a whole set of characters in that show. But I believe he is also the character designer for the Meganoids in general for the show. One other thing fun about him is he has an insane list of pseudonyms. If you look up his Japanese Wikipedia page, he has 13 different pseudonyms listed on his Japanese Wikipedia page, which makes finding credits for this guy very hard if you're going through any other source.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they're great. And did they collectively also serve as the animation director, or was that just Kogawa? Because I know this show actually had one, unlike Zambot.
No, so this show I don't think had what is like a chief animation director, but it had a set of animation directors that worked throughout the series. So they didn't have anyone, as far as I can tell, that was in that like Yoshikazu Yasuhiko position on Gundam, but it's closer to that than what Zambot 3 had.
Because the animation in this show is like way more consistent than Zambot 3. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another really notable name here that we will talking about a lot this season is mechanical design is done by one Okawahara Kunio, who is obviously most famous for his work designing Gundams and various other mobile suits. But, you know, he is the Gundam guy. But when you want to make a new Gundam, he's the first guy you call up because he's made most of them. He started working as a mechanical designer for anime all the way back in 1972 with the series Gatchaman, but this was his first work with Tomino, and in an interview for that Daitarn 3 box set from 2019, this is in the same sort of like page, it's like right below the Tomino line that Okawahara had a statement where he said, quote, "I started working as a mechanical designer on Gatchaman, but Daitarn 3 was the first job where I felt the possibility that this could be a real career. In many ways, it was a first step," which is a much more like expected kind of like positive sounding quote you would use to promote your Blu-ray thing. It's like, this is the first step for the guy who made the Gundam. And not the quote is, you know, if we wanted to make this show good, we should have done something different, which is what Tomino said.
So he did work on Zambot 3, remember, not as the lead mechanical designer, but he did design like the big space. So this isn't the very first time he worked with Tomino, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, because technically this goes back to Bomber X. So,
I hadn't thought of that. Okay, yeah.
He was involved in the whole process of this sort of long chain of things of Bomber X, then became Big Guardian, and then became Daitarn 3. I believe he was involved in that whole like chain of pre-production for this show.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And then music here, like Zambot 3, is Watanabe Takeo and Matsuyama Yuji, who would also go on to do the Mobile Suit Gundam soundtrack. This one is less directly reminiscent of Mobile Suit Gundam soundtrack as Zambot 3, but there are multiple musical cues that do make you do a double take.
Yes.
In particular, there's one that is so similar to the beginning of the Eyecatch like little jingle in Mobile Suit Gundam, and they do this as like something shocking has happened in the episode, and every time it goes on, I'm always caught off guard, but there's no shoo that happens at the same time.
Yes, and as with Zambot 3, like honestly, one of the most like immaculate parts of the production. The soundtrack is great. It's always great. It's very reliable. You really can't go wrong with Watanabe and Matsuyama.
Yes, it is a great soundtrack. And then we have our theme songs. You have the opening theme, Come Here, Daitarn 3. This song is sung by Fujiwara Makoto, who would be better known in the anime world as the singer of the original Macross theme, which is an incredible song. If you've not watched the original Macross, it's so good. He just belts out Makuros over and over again, and it's fucking great. It's so good. This opening theme, Come Here, Daitarn 3, I'm not a big fan of. I don't think it's a particularly good theme song. I like the opening. I like him going 1, 2, 3, Daitarn 3, and him shouting it, and his voice cracks when he shouts 3, which I think is very cool. But the actual song, it's almost like the opposite of the Zambot 3 theme. We talked about the Zambot 3 that the lyrics for that song are like incredibly fucking dumb and stupid. Here for Daitarn 3, I don't know if Tomino wrote the lyrics. I didn't see anything that credited that very specifically. It was credited to like Sunrise, like the Sunrise team or whatever. But the lyrics read more like a Tomino theme song lyrics, and they're like fine. But the music is totally unmemorable, whereas for Zambot 3, the lyrics are very dumb, but the music was very like catchy and very memorable. Like if you asked me to sing the Zambot 3 theme, I could get most of the way through it right now. If you asked me to sing the Daitarn 3 theme, I could go 1, 2, 3, Daitarn 3, and then I'm done. I don't know musically what happens after that point.
Well, here's the thing. This is my problem with the theme song, is that it's a normal 90-second theme, and it feels 5 minutes long because the song just keeps changing directions. Like, it has musically no real identity. Like, there's the opening bit where he's going, Namida wa, nai namida wa. Right. And that part, like, is very memorable. But then it kind of goes in a different direction. It kind of reaches a climax, and you think, okay, song's done. No, we're only halfway through. Because then it kind of starts over and goes in a different direction. And then it ends, and it's like, 15 seconds left. And like, I find it a very tiring opening to get through. It does not have the, like, momentum of... I mean, the Gundam theme will be much better on every dimension, but, like, when you get to that where it feels like the song really carries you through, I don't think this song carries you through.
Yeah, so we're still working on getting the good opening themes for the Tomino shows. Well, you know, Triton of the Sea already had a fucking banger, but Tomino didn't like that one. Good, yeah. So, but unfortunately, Tomino didn't like that one, so he's still working it out. But we do have an ending theme I have a huge amount of affection for, which is Toppo de Tango, performed by Kodogi 73, which is a very strange opening theme or ending theme where you've got Toppo dancing around the most, you know, we'll talk about with the characters, but Toppo is a character I feel like Tomino never figured out what to do with on the show, but it does have such a good mouth feel in Japanese where you say Toppo, and I love the rhythm of the Toppo, 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 Toppo. The rhythm of that and the glottal stop I find very addictive. It's not like a theme song I want to listen to all the time, but I was happy every time it came up and I got that good funky rhythm with the glottal stop at the end of each episode.
Yeah, this one didn't really do anything for me. I'm going to be honest, I sat through that ending theme maybe twice in the whole show. I just was not super into it. And I think it's it's a weird ending to this show, especially because Toppo is the most threadbare character in the entire thing.
It's definitely it's definitely like a strange ending theme to be a part of this show, but I think like musically it's a very fun piece of music that's doing fun stuff with the rhythm of it.
It would be like if Gundam's ending theme was all about Job John. Like,
yes.
I'm like, wait, what? Who was that? Were they in this episode? That's kind of what it would be.
I don't know. I'd be way into if the end of each episode of Gundam is just Job, John, Job, John, Job, John, Job,
Joe,
John, Job,
Joe,
John,
Boo, Joe,
Job, John.
Yeah, it'd be pretty good. All right.
Yes, but those are theme songs. Neither of them particularly good or memorable. I like the top of one. Okay. And that's
Italian
our
opening,
history.
banger. Go listen to the Italian opening. Oh my God.
Yeah. Italian opening, an all-time banger. If you want to appreciate the belting vocals of Fujiwara Makoto, listen to the original Macross theme.
Yes.
Unfortunately, don't listen to the theme for this show. It's basically what we're saying.
All right. So let's talk about the cast, because there's some really good cast members here I want to go through.
Yes. So our main man, the Haran Banjo himself, is voiced by Suzuki Hirotaka, whom would have one of his most famous roles just the following year with Captain Bright in Gundam. Of course, is just one of the all-time great voice actors in history. Unfortunately, he passed away quite a while ago at this point, but he was the original Tenshinhan in Dragon Ball. He's Shiryu in Saint Seiya, and he's also Tatewaki Kuno in Ranma 1/2, are probably his most famous roles, but he was in fucking everything for the 80s and most of the 90s. And this was his first starring role. He had only been an actor for 1 year at the point of Daitarn 3 being made, and had only played background parts before Daitarn 3, so this is his first kind of lead role. And it is an incredible performance. Like like this show hangs on him so hard, and I think he like really brings it together because it's asking him to do a lot by doing both the sort of, I have to have the serious gravitas of this man totally possessed by anger in particular episodes, particularly at the end where he just gives an incredible performance. His performance of the climax episode is just unbelievable. But then also I think he pulls the comedy off in the sort of like suave James Bondish characterization. He just nails it all.
It's a tremendous performance, and it actually took me a couple episodes to figure out who it was, because he's got one of the most recognizable voices in the business. I knew this voice, and the thing is, it's such a different role for Suzuki. He doesn't play characters like this much. Like, Captain Bright is much more of the model for a Suzuki character, like even on to like Tenshinhan. Like, it's kind of the slightly darker, more ambiguous character on the side. More of a character actor kind of voice, but he's doing the full lead actor character here, and absolutely he's fantastic. And it was just, if anything was there are many pleasures in this show, but one of the foremost pleasures was just getting to hear Suzuki do his thing week in and week out, because man, what a fucking actor he was.
Yeah, it's just a huge breakout performance. Like, you can just see immediately like why this dude, obviously he's in like a shit ton of Sunrise anime. I mean, this is something we'll see with a couple of these actors, is that there's obviously a tendency at this point with the like pace at which they're producing shows that are running for like a whole year or most of a year, that they're reusing the same actor a lot. But like, this is just a real breakout performance. But one really fun detail with Haran Banjo is that the name Haran Banjo was a name that Tomino was incredibly proud of. And there's just a hilarious quote from one of the interviews, not with Tomino himself, but someone else involved with the production, saying like that it was one of the first things decided for the series was the main character would be named Haran Banjo. And when Tomino came up with the name, he walked around the studio happily telling everyone about the name Haran Banjo he came up with. And he's just saying, and the quote is, "We can totally do this," after he came up with the name. And it's so Tomino, because I will say, as we start going through this is the show where Tomino becomes the weird name guy. Like, this is the show where everything up to this point, Triton of the Sea is like mostly names pulled from that manga, which are all like Greek mythology names. Obviously, Zambot 3, other than Killer the Butcher, which is a fucking all-time great name, everything else is just regular Japanese people names. But this is where you both have what is on paper a regular Japanese person name. Hadan Banjo is a 4 kanji name. It's not like some weird like spaceman name like Amuro Ray. But even those names are pretty weird, but are very cool. And this is where you just get that sense of he's the master of the mouth feel for the name. Because Hadan Banjo is the most fun name for any actor to say in a show. You just get like every actor when they get to say Hadan Banjo, all the meganoids. It's just so good. It's the fucking perfect name.
I mean, serious question: is it his best name? Because like, I don't think there's any show in the history of anime that has gotten more mileage out of characters simply saying the protagonist's given name than Daitarn 3. Like, and again, it is not a crazy name. It's not Shar Aznable. It's not one of those. But there's something about it. And just, it's exactly what you said. It's the mouthfeel of saying the words Hadan Banjo. Like, that is a masterpiece of a name in a way that, like, I can totally understand if you were Yoshiyuki Tomino and you said the name Hadan Banjo and then you went, I've got a show. One way or another, I have a show because I have that name.
Yeah, it is like, and then after the show, I'm going to have to make a series of books just called the Hadan Banjo series because it's like, I'm not done with it. Because it's also just a fucking cool-ass name because the kanji for Hadan is, the ha is a kanji that means like to rip or destroy, to break, and the ran is the kanji for storm. Like arashi would be the Japanese word, but it's that same kanji. So it's like ripping storm is what Hadan is. Because Hadan obviously is not a normal Japanese surname. Banjo is like a regular person name in Japan, but Hadan is like a weird like made up surname, but it's so fucking cool. And then he has his dad is named Hadan Sozo, and that one's funny because Sozo is just the Japanese word for to create. I mean, it's not even a name. It's just the word to create. Yes. And it kind of feels like he gave up. He's like, he's the guy who made the Meganoids. Whatever. It's Hadan Sozo, father of Hadan Banjo. But yeah, it's an incredible name. And then I did get a distinct pleasure in episode 2, where the main guest star of that episode is voiced by Ginga Banjo, one of our favorite actors. Obviously, Giran Zabi in Mobile Suit Gundam the following year. And you do get to hear Ginga Banjo say the amazing line, "So this is the rumored Hadan Banjo," which is very, very fun.
Very fun. So yeah, it's honestly, like, Hadan Banjo is the glue that holds this show together. The Suzuoki performance, the name, and then the design. The fact that, like, for most of the episodes, he's riding around in a car with a helmet on and looks like Speed Racer. There's something, like, very fun about that. No, it is, like, honestly, a thought I had multiple times watching this is Sunrise should do some kind of modern Hadan Banjo show. Like, maybe do what Tomino did in the books and get rid of the Daitarn, but, like, you could make such a killer, like, episodic anime with this character. Suzuoki is no longer around to voice him, but there are, I'm sure, a lot of younger actors who could do a great job with this part. I feel like we need some kind of, like, new Hadan Banjo show. Like, I don't even know if he needs to be fighting Meganoids. It's just something. It's just such a great character. I want more of him.
Yeah, and I love it where, you have those, like, the very elaborate, like, posters of this era of 70s anime, that have, like, taking those character designs, but rendering them with these, like, beautiful kind of, like, watercolors and, like, this heavy detail. And Hadan Banjo's character design is so cool when it's rendered in that kind of, like, higher level of fidelity, where his hair is so crazy. And in the show, I think, like, depending on the episode, they sometimes have a hard time fully executing on that character design, but there's such an energy to that character design and the way his hair flares up, that when you get, like, those really nice depictions in the promotional material from the time, it's just, like, it's a great character design that I think communicates that, like, the wrath inherent in the character that he keeps bottled up that he lets out when he fights the Meganoids. Yeah, it's just a great lead character. It's a great lead performance. And then you've got here, let's move on to the supporting cast, where I think this is one of the interesting elements of this show. This is one of the places where I think this show is a really important stepping stone for Tomino, where his previous shows that we've covered, with Triton of the Sea and particularly Zambot, struggle with the supporting cast. They maybe, like, each has, like, one member of the supporting cast kind of works okay as a character, but generally there's, like, a bunch of characters that just kind of fall apart. And I think, like, one of the big things with Daitarn is that early on it struggles with its supporting cast, and then when it starts getting good is once it starts finding things for these characters to do. And I think that's like one of the things that Tomino learns over the course of the show is how to use a full cast of characters, maybe with the exception of Tuppo, which we'll talk about. But you have our two kind of heroines. So we've got the first one let's talk about is Sanjo Reika, who is voiced by Inoue Yo, who would the following year voice, of course, Sailor Mass in Gundam. She also is one of the main characters in Space Runaway Ideon, where she plays Cheryl in that show.
Wait, Cheryl Formosa. I didn't know that was her name. Oh my god. Yeah. Like, Sean, we are going to have to do in a finale episode a like top 10 Tomino names and debate is Haran Banjo the best, because now I've seen Cheryl Formosa, and that might, yeah, oh my god, that's going to be a hard top 10 list.
Yeah. Oh, we've got a lot of good Tomino names, because this is the show where he cracks it, and they're all up from here. I've been playing through fucking Super Robot Wars Y, which has Aura Battler Dunbine and Heavy Metal Elgheim are both featured in that, and I have obviously not watched those shows yet because we haven't got to them for this podcast, but I just get random characters from those shows pop up in the game. I'm like, oh my god, it's another one. It's another Tomino character I've never seen before with the greatest character design and the greatest name ever. So yes, we will have to go through the names at some point. But Inoue Yo, she had a little bit more experience than Suzuki at this point, but was not like a big actress. So this was kind of along with Suzuki, a big breakout role for her. This was the first role she had where she was cast as an adult woman, like she played like animals or little kids before this point. And obviously like after this, she is known for playing mostly like adult kind of, not necessarily like the sexy lady, but like the very kind of like powerful, confident adult woman, right? That's Sayla, that's Cheryl Formosa in Space Runner Ideon. Kanaka Clancy in Pat Labor is very much that kind of character. And so it's like a kind of role that she's much more known for. And Reika is kind of like the first time she played this type of character. And one thing that's interesting is she was actually originally cast as Beauty, and Beauty's actress Mizuno Kako was cast as Reika, but while they were making the first episode of the show, it wasn't working, and they ended up switching the roles, and it just fit way better, and they stuck with it that way, which is pretty interesting. And I think this is another, just like Suzuki as Banjo, I think this is just immediately, it's such a great performance, it's such a powerful voice. You hear so much of the performance she's going to give as Sayla, in this, while getting to have a little bit more of that kind of comic energy, even if she's kind of like the straight man of the bunch along with Banjo. She's not the one kind of saying the wacky stuff, that's more Beauty's role. But it is another, just like, you feel such a kind of confidence and power in the performance immediately, and it's so clear why this person's going to go on to be one of the dominant voice actresses of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just going to be a recurring theme with all these actors, Sean, is that, like, even in the periods when the show is not using its supporting cast well, those voices all kind of carry a gravitas that brings you through the episodes in a way that... Because I would imagine that Tomino is becoming a better director of voices also at this point, because we know he was not engaged in that at all on Triton, and becomes more engaged over time. And I do think, like, the voice work is a notable, like... Not that the voice work in Zambot is bad, it's very good in Zambot, but I feel like you hear it take a step up here.
Yes, and one very fun thing is I found like a very high detailed screenshot of a magazine that was released in like 1980, but with interviews that were clearly made during the production of Mobile Suit Gundam with various actors, but it's a book about Daitarn 3. And in that magazine, she gives this quote that I just think is incredible, where if you just want to know how fucking cool Inoue Yo is, she says, quote, "I really love the parts where she infiltrated the enemy, like the enemy's base," which is a thing that she does in a lot of episodes in the show. That she says, "Between her and Sayla from Gundam, I guess if we were ever to be invaded by an enemy, I'd be like one of those characters and pick up a weapon and fight," which is a fucking cool thing to say in your random interviews. Like, yeah, I guess I play these really strong ladies who like go and fight the aliens and shit. I don't know, if it ever happened here, yeah, I'd probably go get a weapon and I'd probably go fight them off. Totally unprompted. There's just a thought that came up off the top of her head, which is very fucking cool thing to say.
Absolutely.
All right, and then we've got our other female lead here, which is the beautiful Tachibana. And I do want to, even though they call her Beauty throughout the show, it's important to note her actual name is Beautiful Tachibana, and Beauty is just her nickname. But her, like, I'm sure if you get her birth certificate, the first name for this character is Beautiful. That's it. It's the word beautiful. Yet another all-time great fucking Tomino game name is Beauty, or the Beautiful Tachibana. And this is a very interesting one in terms of the actress, because she's voiced by an actress named Mizuno Kako. And this is the first, and as far as I can find, only anime role she's ever had. She mostly did like narration for commercials and things in that sector, and not really anime. And I never found anything after this where she did anime. But I think it's, and I think you can kind of feel that it's less of a kind of like anime voice actor performance when you stack it up next to Inoue Yo's voice, Suzuki Hirotaka's voice, that have that like very full rounded nature to the voice, that it's just like, you could like, this is a fucking like voice actor, that it has that complete presence to the voice. Hers has a little bit more of that, like when you're going for a more raw style performance, like we'll get in latter Tomino, where latter day Tomino casts mostly unknown actors that have that much more raw kind of quality to their performance. Mizuno Kako is a bit more in that realm, but I think it fits the nature of the character Beauty a lot. And I came to, this is a character that I wasn't super into early on, but I think as the show goes on, it gets much and much better about using her and having a lot more fun with her. And once they get that dirty pair / I guess beauty pair dynamic between her and Reika, it's one of my favorite parts of the show, is those two characters getting to play off of each other.
Definitely the fact that the two voice actors come from very different backgrounds helps, because like,
yes,
it really makes those characters feel different, right? Like, even in periods where you don't have a lot of story stuff around them, just the fact that, like, Mizuno Kako sounds very different than Inoue Yo, and they feel like they're different kinds of performers, makes that chemistry work in a different way. It's a savvy piece of casting, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's something where you can just feel... this is something I've been thinking about a lot watching through the KyoAni show City the Animation, which has a very old school style of how it records, where it's like everybody is together all the time, which is how it was done, especially in the 70s, where I think you can just get the sense about the like where the second core starts, where this cast of actors have become so familiar with each other, playing these characters week in, week out, like for like 20 weeks in a row. That there's just a really nice energy to the recordings, and you can feel the actors bouncing off of each other in real time, and like that kind of that dynamic in the recording booth. It's just and this is true of a lot of like old school anime that's really well done. This is very true, especially of something like the Lupin the Third shows, where that cast just becomes so familiar with each other. But I think you start to develop that in the show, particularly between Mizuno and Inoue, where there's just a really great energy between those two performers that they capture here.
Definitely.
But there's one other thing with Beauty that I have to bring in, which is the best Tomino quote I found for anything related to the show. And this is him talking about the difficulties he had in trying to make this character, where he says, quote, "Because I'm not the kind of person to find humor or eroticism in a character like Beauty, I struggled with the character. Even though the image of them running with their large breasts jiggling is necessary for that kind of character, I just don't find those things interesting, so I couldn't draw or depict it. Unless you like that kind of long, blonde-haired character enough to have a fetish for them, you can't really direct for them." And that is Tomino very frankly reflecting on the creative process of trying to direct for Beauty, where he's like, I mean, really, I have to have her boobs bouncing all over the place, but I just am not into that, and I just don't really want that. So it was really hard. And man, you really have to have a fucking fetish for this character to direct to do it the right way, is kind of what he's saying.
But, like, that is true if you look at his work
Yes.
in this period. Like, because this is a period where you start to get that kind of character on screen a lot, and he's just never done that. He's just never done that with his female characters. You have, like, women in the original Gundam who are, like, beautiful women, but they're never really depicted, like, in that kind of way. Like, there's a scene where Mirai is nude in Gundam, but it's not sexualized in the slightest. It's just her coming out of the shower because she's showering with the kids and needs Amuro's help with the sink, right? Like, yeah. And it is something that I think actually helps in making he's very good at characterizing women in his shows, and part of it is that he's not doing the kind of fan servicey things that he's describing, but it is also true that Beauty is kind of built to be that kind of fan servicey character, so it is a tension in the show.
As far as when we get into some of the episodes, there is a later episode that does use Beauty that way, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, because you're like, oh, There's like a couple of little moments, but like, in the last episode, there's the scene of them putting on the cat suits or whatever, and the camera shot starts on her butt and like goes up. There's like a couple little things like that, but it's certainly not as much as you'd expect. And there's one episode where they have her in like the like Tarzan Jane kind of outfit and stuff that's like, oh, this is weird. But I do like, I tried my best in translating that quote, but if you read Japanese, I do just recommend going on the Japanese Wikipedia and reading it because it's so much better in his actual like voice. And I do want to just point out that I tried to be very tactful in translating saying large breasts, but what he's saying in Japanese is dekkai oppai, where he puts a glottal stop on the word dekkai, which means big, to like emphasize them being huge, and it's very funny. Like it's a little detail of the way he says it, at least in how it's transcribed on that interview. That I just love that it's not Dekai, Dekai. He puts that glottal stop. It's Dekai. It's like, yep, I love Tomino, like a fucking madman.
All right, and then we've got Topo, right?
Yep. Yes. I wrote it down.
You wrote it wrong here, but that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Topo, which is voiced by Shiraishi Fuyumi, who we would know best as Mirai from Mobile Suit Gundam. So, obviously we've got 3 Gundam sort of like leads in this show, effectively, between the 3 of them. She also voiced Akiko Hoshi in Hoshi no Kyojin and Sachi in Ashita no Joe. So unlike the others, Shiraishi had been like in a lot of big projects at this point, because those are both big characters in those series. She will also voice the character Kasha in Space Runaway Ideon, obviously along with like lots of other things, but we will see her in Ideon as well. And this is the one where I think she does a perfectly, fine job in terms of the vocal performance. Topo is the character where it feels like he is only there because you need to have a little kid character. Like if he feels like a studio note in the production of this show. I didn't find a thing that like explicitly said from like behind the scenes production. I've seen people comment that that's what the character feels like. I haven't seen confirmation that that is literally what happened with him, but it does feel like whether it was literally a producer note or just this sense that you have to have a little kid character on the show, he just feels like he's kind of thrown in there to kind of fill a niche, and it doesn't feel like Tomino gives a shit about him. You can tell that Tomino doesn't give a shit about him because they didn't find some insane quote about the making of this character the way I did for Beauty.
Yes, and it is too bad, because, like, I can see the role he should be filling in this, which is that you have a kind of formed family here. You have these dynamics that kind of presage what Gundam is going to do. You know, Gundam has its 3 little war orphans, Kika, Cats, and Let's, who are done spectacularly well. Like, Kika, Cats, and Let's are such good versions of that kind of character. And I kind of expected, because we meet Topo in episode 2, and I thought, oh, this kind of seems like it's a proto Kika, Cats, and Let's. I'm curious to see where this goes. And it kind of never goes anywhere. There are fun Topo moments, the performance is good, the character design is good, but it is kind of disappointing, because like that is the element of kind of the familial dynamics on the crew that hasn't been cracked yet, that will be cracked in Gundam.
Yeah, I do like with the character design, even though I don't think this is one of the ones designed by the Ideon guy, he does look like the main character Cosmo Yuki from Ideon, who's the guy with like the huge red afro and the fucking knife on his belt. It does look like if you try to draw him as a little kid, this is what he'd look like, because Topo does have like a little version of a red afro, and that's like a kind of a fun coincidence. But yeah, it's just like a character that feels like the show's not all that invested in. I did though, this is less to do with Daitarn and more just like how fucking wild it was reading this quote. From that magazine scan I talked about earlier with Inoue Yo, there's an interview with Shiraishi Fuyumi as well, and this is just like a fucking crazy thing to read when you're thinking about there's a very small window in time in the history of anime in which someone could refer to Gundam in this super casual way before Gundam becomes very famous after the movies. And so again, this is like during the making of Gundam or the airing of Gundam is when this interview would have been had. And so she said, quote, "At first I thought mecha anime was just there to sell toys, but working with Tomino-san on Daitarn 3, I realized that he was taking a different path. Right now I'm working on my second show with him, Gundam, and between the themes and the style of production, it's really good. My original feelings on these kinds of robot shows are all gone now. I feel like I've been blessed by encountering such great projects one after the other. I'm thrilled to be part of work which can cook up such a great mecha show." And I love the incredibly offhand way of like, right now I'm working on another thing with him, and it's called Gundam. It's
yes.
just like, in like a year or two, you would... you'd be like, and yeah, I was part of Gundam, and it's like changed the landscape of this kind of anime completely. It's not just like, yeah, I'm doing another one. It's so great.
Well, and also just the fact that that's such a present tense quote of like, you know, I didn't think mecha was that cool, but then like I'm in the middle of doing these things with this director.
Yes.
And this is pretty cool stuff, and like not aware, because how could she be aware that the work she's doing is changing the world? Like, you know, It's crazy. Yeah, that's awesome.
I was very excited when I stumbled, because I was just trying to, how I found that magazine scan was me just trying to find anything else that Mizuno Kako had been in, because there's just so little information about her, and I stumbled on that magazine scan. It was like, oh my god, this is a fucking little treasure trove. Then next up, we've got probably my favorite character in the whole show, which is Garrison Tokida, voiced by Kitamura Koichi, who has been in a lot of stuff, nothing that we've covered, so I didn't put anything on here, because he's mostly a character actor, but he has been in, like, anime for decades and decades.
He has been in anime for decades and decades. He is also a prolific dub actor. And Sean, did you know that he has voiced both Alfred in Batman and Q in James Bond?
No, I didn't think to look at live action dubs with him.
So here's the thing. Those are both after Daitarn, which is kind of crazy. But he is Alfred in the 1989 Batman. So he dubs over Michael Gough as Alfred. And he is Q in a number of James Bond movies starting in the 80s with A View to a Kill. And he did a bunch of them through into the Pierce Brosnan era. And his first time dubbing in James Bond was the same year as Daitarn. It's with the movie Goldfinger for the NTV television dub. He voices a character called Colonel Smithers, who is played by Richard Vernon in that movie, who is a character who just looks a lot like Garrison. So, like, he definitely played this kind of character, but this is one of the first times he did that kind of character. He also would go on to voice Scrooge McDuck in all of the DuckTales media that was dubbed. So, like, this dude, perfectly cast. That is the kind of voice that you want for this. And I agree, Garrison is the most delightful. There's an episode where he pilots the Daitarn and does a fight, and it is the most delightful thing in the entire series, because they have the Daitarn animated. It's the best use of the Daitarn in the show, is when Garrison is inside it. This guy rocks, and I just love that Kitamura Koichi went on to have a career that absolutely, like, justified their casting him here.
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah, I should have thought to look at live action dubs as well. Because again, also in anime, like, he's very prolific. It's just there wasn't a role that jumped out to me. It's like, oh, this is a thing we've covered that he's huge in. But it's a great performance. It's a great character. And I feel like you can measure the quality of Daitarn 3 as a show by how it uses Garrison, where early on, he's used very sparingly and kind of in a very generic way. And then slowly, bit by bit, surely he becomes like the guy who's by far the most effective member of the team. And once they kind of land on that gag, I think like his character in a lot of the show just sort of shines really well, where he's the guy who can do everything that Hadan does, but better, and while sipping a cup of tea with his pinky up. You know, like, it's just, he's perfect. I don't even really know why Hadan Banjo has to be here, because Garrison can take care of everything. And lest we forget that is also just named Garrison. It's not Gary. He's the, like, the English word garrison for, like, where you, like, a battalion kind of idea. And I don't know if Tomino knew what the word garrison was. I don't know if he knew that was an English word that already existed, but I like that he's named Garrison, because it sounds like it should be a name in English, but it's not a name in English, and those are always some of the best anime names.
Garrison Tokida, you know, just that great old Japanese name.
Yep, good old Garrison. And then we have what I think is the other best character in the show, which is Kodos, voiced by Nobusawa Miyako, who would be, Jonathan, you know her very well because she is Lana in Future Boy Conan.
Yes.
I know her very well because she played the role Achan's mom in episode 36 of Ultraman 80, which would have aired a couple years after this, which is the episode Let's Go Stag Beetle Wintering Team, which is legitimately one of the best episodes of that show. It's like, if you want to watch one episode of Ultraman 80, I would watch that episode, and also it happens to have this actress in it, obviously in a live action role, as Achan's mom. Which is, if I remember who that is in that episode correctly, that's like a major character, because it's about this kid and his relationship with his mom and his stag beetle that some other kids steal and end up accidentally killing, and then it comes back as a monster, and Ultraman 80 has to fight it, but then turn it back into a little beetle so he can have his little beetle pet. And it's a great episode. And she's great in that, and she's even better here because Kodos is just, I think you can see a whole world open up for Tomino with the character of Kodos. She is like the prototype for an entire kind of character that Tomino gets very heavily invested in, that you will see in Gundam with Kaisila Zabi. Obviously for us, I think like the epitome of this character is Haman Karn. But the enemy female like commander who is powerful and also elegant, and there's a kind of nobility to them, even if they're cruel. And that kind of, the contrast with someone like, here you don't have as distinct the contrast because Don Sauser is a more kind of enigmatic character. But you generally have that kind of character in Tomino show contrasted with their male counterpart that is a bit more despicable. With Giran Zabi in Gundam, you've got Paptimus Shiroko in Zeta Gundam opposite Haman Karn. And so there's just a whole type that Tomino kind of comes into, and Kodos is the prototype for it. And there are multiple quotes I found of both Tomino and people involved in the production of him just basically describing himself as being as literally falling head over heels in love is how I would describe the phrase he used with Kodosu during the production of the show. Like literally falling in love with her.
And you can see it because it's very clearly a retcon by the end that Dawn Souther has been like comatose the whole time.
Yes.
And she's really been in charge. But like it works because like that's a very canny creative move to have said, you know what? Don Sauser is just a guy who's been sitting over here. Kodos has been the actual character. Let's just elevate her to the level of main antagonist, and that's absolutely the right move. I also love that the word Kodos means to kill in Japanese, which means this is the second straight Tomino anime with a villain whose given name is basically just Killer. And I kind of love that.
Yeah, and it is, that is definitely something, if you don't know Japanese, will be lost on you, is how insane her name is, because it is just wild to have a person just named Kill, Kodos, but it's used, like, as a pun. Like, the big episode at the midpoint of the show, episode 20, is Kodos cannot kill, or Kodos wa Kodos hanai, and so it is direct pun. So if you translate it to English, it should be Kill Can't Kill, is what that title is. Also one of the best episodes in the show. But, like, Kodos... There's just, it kind of like Garrison, you can feel the show get so much better once it realizes what it has with this character and how interesting and dynamic she is. And like once I think Tomino really kind of zeroes in on Kodos and what she does for the Meganoids, of like kind of brings that whole side of the show alive in a very different way, makes the Meganoids feel like real characters that have these like very strange pathologies almost in their relationship with Kodos, either their kind of like undying affection for her or their desire to betray and overthrow her, is one of the things that makes the latter section of the show. I say latter section, it's like the last 2/3 of the show, it falls into that pattern, that's what the Meganoid's motivation becomes. And I think that just makes the dynamic of the villains in each episode so much more interesting, that they have these like whole lives that they have, and this whole like internal dynamic within the world of the Meganoids, at which Kodos is the top, but technically she should be playing second fiddle to Don Sauser, but she's the one actually giving the directions. And obviously at the end of the series, we learned that she truly is just the one giving the directions, and the whole like muffled speech that Don Sauser has is just a like puppet show basically for her to like have the power that she has in that organization. Once they start playing with those dynamics, I just think it makes each episode so much more interesting, because the antagonist role becomes much more fulfilling. And in the first 10 or so episodes, a lot of the bad guys are super disposable, utterly forgettable. They just have like no personality, and Kodos just lends a huge amount of dynamism to that whole half of the show.
I completely agree. And the 2 episodes of Daitarn that if you just want to know what did this show contribute to Tomino's ongoing artistic identity, the 2 you need to watch are episode 20 and episode 40. And 20 is the one where Kodos like fully comes to the fore, and it feels like that is a prototype of like the episode in Zeta Gundam where Haman Karn enters and Char has his famous line about how he's never betrayed anyone ever. It's like a prototype of that kind of episode. And then episode 40, which is the finale that we keep gushing about, and is also centrally about Kodos, and the denouement of the whole series is about the relationship between Kodos and Banjo. So yeah, definitely this character and those 2 episodes are the ones that like really tie it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously we have a whole host of guest stars, which at a certain point I just gave up putting them in my notes because there was too many. So I put a couple of them, which we talked about in some of the episodes. But that kind of wraps up our main cast talk here. Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
So yeah, do you want to just get into the show itself? I know there's some specific episodes we want to hit on, but do you want to just talk at a high level about what does and does not work with this series?
Yeah, and I think we can kind of almost look at it in some of these phases we've been talking around, where, you know, I think the whole idea of the show obviously is this: let's make something that is, you know, not a like comedy, but has a kind of comic element to it, is very light on its feet, can move from genre to genre, from episode to episode. Some can be very dramatic, some can be more funny. And I think it takes a while for the show to get into it. But I guess from like the top level perspective, I think what's really important about the show, if we're thinking about it in the context of Tomino's development, is we've looked at a kind of common thing we've talked about in our first two episodes is with Triton of the Sea and with Zambot 3. Both of those shows really struggle with how they structure themselves. With Triton of the Sea, like being ultimately like a very episodic show, but trying to be more serialized than it is, like wanting to try to tell a more serialized story. And as a result, the individual episodes are very repetitive. Like every episode of Triton of the Sea basically feels like every other episode. Because I think Tomino limits the scope of what that show can do in his desire to tell a specific story that leads to Triton realizing that he's been not necessarily just fighting for the side of good and all that kind of stuff at the end. Zambot 3 is a little bit better, but also really struggles in that balance between how much of this is just like episode of the week, we're fighting another one of the Megaborgs, or fucking mechanoids, whatever the fuck they're called. It's so hard to keep straight. The bad guys in Zambot 3 and Daitarn are so similar named. But the bad guys each week in Zambot 3, there's a lot of episodes that are just super kind of generic for fighting another one of those guys. It struggles with the character development, feels very odd and kind of herky-jerky, and so it struggles with those serialized elements. And so when you come to Daitarn 3, I think the thing that's fascinating is it just jettisons that almost entirely outside of kind of the midpoint with episode 20, with the Kodos episode, and the last episode, episode 40. And other than that, it is like a true blue episodic show. Each episode is its own thing. There is a huge range of what these episodes can be. Some of them are like high tragedies, like you have the Trojan Horse episode that is like a tragedy story. Some of them are just more kind of like action thrillers. That's what the first section of the show is, just a bunch of kind of action episodes over and over again, which gets fairly tedious once it starts changing things up. Some of them are like fucking wild, high concept weird comedies, like you have the episode that is just an entire parody, episode 22. It's just a series of movie parodies, one after the other. Not necessarily a good episode, but like an interesting episode. And so there's something about the show's ability to be very flexible in a way that a Dirty Pair or a way that Lupin the Third can be, that once it settles into, we can have that flexibility. We can change the genre. We can use different characters different ways. We can have some episodes be a garrison episode. This one can be a beauty episode. The show, I think, kind of discovers, or for me, my reading of like Tomino as a series director, discovers that kind of ability that these episodic shows have of covering so much and that giving a different sense of structure that I think is really important. Like, I think it's just in my mind, there's such a clear connection between him being able to stretch his legs on this kind of show that has the rigor of every episode that Daitarn 3 comes out. The Daitarn 3 gives a specific speech. It's going to end every episode with it using the sun attack. Like it's like an episode of Sailor Moon or something where it's got a very like specific structure of beats of certain pillars that every single episode has to do. But everything outside of those pillars is totally open to what they want to do for that episode and can be fucking wild and crazy, as long as at some point he gets into Daitarn 3. At some point, somebody says the speech about, for the sake of people, for the sake of the world, we will crush the, ambitions of the Meganoids. If you do not fear the shining sun, then come get me, like however we want to translate that speech. Someone has to give that speech. Someone has to shoot the sun attack. Other than that, you can do whatever you want. And I think that's the thing he needs to be able to blow open some of those horizons that leads into a Gundam that is the best of both worlds, that has a serialized story with lots of momentum, but also has the flexibility of being able to tell a much bigger story that changes and evolves and moves from place to place in really dynamic ways, that uses the structure of an episode in really dynamic and creative ways, that can have episodes where Sayla gets into Gundam instead of Amuro and see what happens with that, where Amuro abandons the Gundam and they have to deal with those things. I think some of that freedom of expression and of narrative exploration, to me, kind of grows out of what he's able to do on Daitarn 3.
I think that is a really good assessment and kind of diagnosis of how this show works in the overall career. And I do think, like, if you take the strengths of Zambot 3 and the strengths of Daitarn 3, you have a blueprint for why Gundam will be such an interesting mixture of strengths and why Gundam will feel revolutionary. Because I don't think either Daitarn or Zambot have it all, but Gundam is going to have it all, and I think the pieces of it are here. I will also say, though, that I found Daitarn really tough to get into early on. And I think part of that is that it has one kind of fatal error as an episodic show early on that I think a thing it's missing is that I feel really ungrounded within the reality of the story early on.
Yes.
Obviously, I have no problem with a purely episodic series. You know how much I love Lupin the Third and all of that, and I loved Dirty Pair. I have no problem with that. But I do think you need to have a clear understanding at the outset of the world and the stakes and everyone's place in it so that those episodic stories can work. Even, like, Tomino's prior shows up to this point, like Zambot and Triton, are really good at laying out the world right away. Like Triton and Zambot, their first episodes get you into the story in a really clear, compelling way. And in Daitarn, you started off, I like the first episode of this show, it's very fun. It ends with that amazing image of the Daitarn surrounded by all the girls jetpacking in a heart. It's great. But, like, I don't feel there's any explanation of the status quo. Like, other than the inference that the Meganoids are bad and Banjo is good, you don't really understand the state of the world, where or when we are. Like, is this the future? Is this, like, an alternate reality? Like, are they in Japan? Are we a spacefaring race yet? None of that is clear. You don't know what our state of humanity or technological development. You don't know who Banjo is. You don't know why he has Garrison. You don't even get his backstory until over a dozen episodes in. Like, you learn about him escaping from Mars, but you don't learn about his father's role. His father's role is like episode 18 or something. It's almost halfway through the show. Like, this show desperately needs a Gundam-style narrative setting opening spiel, the way the early episodes of Gundam all start with that narration about, like, the 1 year war, and, like, if people went into space, they lived, they died, here's what's going on. It needs that, or I think it needs a Lupin the Third style theme song that just quickly outlines the main characters and their roles, like, here's Haran, here's Korosu, here's Garrison, here's who they are. And it could have either of those, or it could just have, I think, a clearer first episode, where if you think of, like, great episodic shows, like Dirty Pair, I think, is probably the best version of this, where you can watch Dirty Pair in whatever order you want, but the first episode of Dirty Pair is really good at introducing you into who they are, what they do, why they are called the Dirty Pair, all of that stuff. Or like the original Lupin the Third Part 1, it's the Is Lupin Burning episode with the car race. That one doesn't even have every character in it, but, like, I think it gets you into the rhythm of what Lupin the Third is really cleanly. When they came back for Lupin the Third Part 2, the first episode of that, which, like, reunites the characters and establishes this time this is a globe-trotting adventure, that one also does that. I just feel like you spend a lot of this show unanchored in the reality of this thing. I didn't even really know what the Meganoids were until a certain point. Like, I guess they're cyborgs? Not sure. And I feel like that is a real anchor around the show, because an episodic show just needs to have a clearer sense of what the world is, and I think it takes a while for Daitarn to clear its throat enough to give us that.
I totally agree. And I think what's interesting is, like, that elusiveness of the setting is never dispelled, because you eventually get like a decent idea of, okay, yeah, these are, like, the Meganoids are these cyborgs from Mars that Haran's father, Haran Sozo, created. And then eventually you get some information in a really good episode much later. I think it's in, like, the 30s, where you get he kind of has to the Past Dreams in Darkness, episode 36.
Yes.
It's right near the end where he gets the kind of flashbacks from the Meganoid and fighting the Meganoid that you learn a little bit more of like, okay, his like brother was turned into a cyborg by his dad, and I think his mom was as well, and they have both seemingly died. And so you get like some of that stuff that's detailed, but there's a lot of things that you just like never really get much clarity on, like what is Garrison's relationship to Hadan Banjo? Like, was Garrison on Mars? Is he the family butler? Like, who is this guy? Beauty in her connection to Hadan Banjo is also kind of odd and is never really expanded on because she's already working with him in the first episode. The first episode details how Reika joins the group, but Beauty's already there. And, you get eventual little things like her dad runs like a space tourism company or whatever, but you never really learn much about her connection with him. And then also, like Kodos and Don Sauser, their whole relationship to Banjo in the main plot is also very mysterious, where you keep on kind of waiting for a big reveal. I think us living in a post-Empire Strikes Back world, it's hard to not have Don Sauser be Hadan Banjo's dad, because that so feels like the twist. I feel like that feels like the twist anyways. When Empire Strikes Back exists for us, but did not exist for them, it really feels like that has to be the twist, that it's his dad. And I don't think he is. Like, I don't think he is supposed to be his dad. It's like you could read metaphorical stuff in there, but I feel like there's enough them explicitly trying to state directly that those are not the same people. The voice actor in the last episode that does the kind of voiceover for Hadan Banjo's dad is different than the one for Don Sauser. So there's like stuff like that where you never really get a very clean picture of the basic details of the setting. And that doesn't become as big of an impediment to enjoying the show around the midpoint once it starts like really locking in with other elements, but it is always a strange part of the show that it never really locks those things in. You never have a clear sense of grounding. You never have a sense of how does the world think of Meganoids? Like, how does the rest of Earth, what is their relationship to the Meganoids? How aware are they of all the Meganoid stuff is something that's never particularly clear. So like
it's
that
extra
world
jarring when you're coming from Zambot 3, which is all setting all the time. Like, it's so devoted to, we are in Japan. Japan-ass Japan. We're in a identifiable location. It's all about the public's like awareness of what is going on. The overall family, the Gene family, is like a huge part of what the relationships of the show are about. It's like it just completely swaps like strengths and weaknesses in a very jarring way.
Yes, because I think it to me feels like it's Tomino has never been the series director for this kind of show. He has always done shows that are, not hyper-serialized in the ways that we think of as modern anime, but for the time, Triton of the Sea and Zambot 3 are basically serialized shows. They tell a plot with a beginning, middle, and end. Every episode contributes in some way to that plot. Again, it's not like, a modern anime where it's like one story arc broken up into 12 pieces or something like that. It still has an episodic structure that's very clear. But for the time, compared to a Lupin the Third or other contemporaneous anime that are very episodic in style, those shows are fairly serialized. This, it feels like it's Tomino. It feels like he has such a clear idea that he wants it to be an episodic show. That memo is like, this will not be anything more than simple entertainment, is like part of the idea of the show. But he has also in his head and in his notes created a very elaborate setting that has like a very detailed history of what happened on Mars that led to the creation of the Megaborgs and all this kind of stuff. Like, he has that made. But I think it's like the sense of him not knowing how to integrate that elegantly into the show. And he's just not at that point as a creator where he can juggle all those plates at the same time. Like, eventually he gets incredibly good at this exact thing, at building a very elaborate lore, a very elaborate sense of fiction, not necessarily giving you like a whole episode that's just let's get used to the setting. He's very good at throwing you into the midst of things in his shows as kind of a hallmark of his style, but he's so expert in later series, especially with Gundam, like giving you this like experience of the world where you feel grounded because the world feels like it's so grounded in its own rules, and you're just unlearning those rules, and those rules are being kind of unveiled to you in a very natural way. Here, it feels like he kind of wants to try to do that, but does not know how to do that because he's also because also for the first like 12 episodes, they have like no plot. You know, like I, for my notes, went through and I wrote like a simple plot description for each episode for my own sanity. And the first like 10 or something episodes, basically all of my plot notes are a single sentence, because that's the only thing that happens. Like
Yes.
the first episode, my plot description is Banjo infiltrates a beauty pageant. I guess I could add and Meganoids are there, but that's the whole episode. And action ensues. Episode 2, Neros, the bad guy, floats a city like Ultron. And action ensues. Then I say first appears by Topo. Episode 3, a pirate Meganoid wants to miniaturize and collect people, but is betrayed by his henchmen. Like that's the whole episode. Like there's nothing else happening in that episode. And so it's like there's this simplicity to these episodes where they're just like, here's a premise and a bunch of action happens. And it's not giving you any sense of, like, none of it's contributing to the world. You're not really learning in any clear way what the Meganoids are. You're not learning more about who Hadan Banjo is or Beauty or Garrison. Like, it's just, here's a premise for the bad guy, and now let's do some action. And that's, like, it for episode after episode. And that opening stretch is very tedious, and it creates this, like, sensation you're having of, like, you're so unhinged and so lost in what this world is and who are these people, and it feels like the episodes are not giving you anything to build on that. And it isn't until episode 12, The Distant Golden Star, where that whole episode is just a huge flashback showing you what happened with Banjo. Like that should have been like episode 3 or 2 or something like that, you know, like that, or something like that should have happened much earlier to at least give you a sense of what this world is, so you could be more invested in the characters, to care more about the action that happens in that first run of episodes.
Yeah, and it is perpetually a problem. And, like, here's the thing. There are... Most, like, purely episodic shows do have some kind of premise-setting first episode. You know, yes. Pokemon, its first episode is Ash leaving the house, talking to Professor Oak, getting Pikachu. It gives you the origin of all that. You know, episode DuckTales has a pilot that explains how the nephews came to live with Scrooge. All of that, right? But if you just start, as we all did as kids, and you saw one of those shows midway through its run, you just saw a random episode of DuckTales, random episode of Pokemon, random episode of Lupin the Third, you can still get into it because the show feels pretty confident in what it has and has not told the audience, and so it can, like, cleanly work from that. And Daitarn does feel pretty perpetually confused about that. And I agree, I think the first core is really rough. And the problem with that first core is, as you're saying, there's barely any story within the episodes, as well as, like, in a macro sense. And you also just have so little with the supporting cast. They just appear at the very beginning and the very end, and then the middle is just all in the robot. And here's the other problem we gotta talk about this show, is that the robot fucking sucks. I hate to say this. I am sorry, Okawada-san. You know how much we love your work. With you know, Gundam was about to change the world, and the Gundam rocks, and the Zaku rocks, and everything else this guy's ever done is great. The Daitarn is a bad design. It's a bad robot, and this is the only Tomino show that I would say has bad action. Like, I think when they're on the ground, or they're in a car, or they're otherwise out of the robot, you can have good Tomino action. But once Banjo is in the robot, this show has the exact same problem as Mobile Fighter G Gundam would in 1994, which is that every fight is the same, every fight is very flat, and then it ends with, in G Gundam, it's the Shining Finger, in this show it is the Sun Attack, and it is always just a get-out-of-jail-free Deus Ex Machina, no strategy involved kind of thing. And so whenever they're in the robot, it's very boring. That first core of episodes is almost all in the robot, and they're kind of interminable to me. And then I think there is basically, you had the rule of, like, an episode of Daitarn is good based on how much Garrison is in it. I think an episode of Daitarn is good based on how little Daitarn is in it. And, like, that continues all the way through the finale, where the Daitarn is in one scene, and that's exactly how it should be, because the more time you keep Banjo out of the robot, and because the robot's only function is to do the sun attack, the robot should only be there for the last couple of minutes. And I think once you get particularly into the middle stretch on, the show gets much better about that, where he will never get in the robot before the act break. You'll have a lot of build-up, you'll have a lot of supporting cast, and that's when the show is able to get good. But when you have the dual problems, or the triple problems, I guess, of unclear setting, flat plots, and way too much robot action, Daitarn 3 has a really rough opening stretch of episodes.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. Like, I don't dislike the design of the Daitarn 3. Like, I think the robot looks... I honestly, I like the design of it more than I do the Zambot 3. I don't have much affection for. I don't particularly like either of them all that much, but I definitely prefer Daitarn 3. And it's more, I like the Daitarn 3 has just a bunch of ridiculous like moves and things. It's got like its crazy fans. He's got a big dick missile, which I'm a fan of when he shoots a giant missile out of the robot's dick. It's like, that's fun. But I
think
agree
it's
that,
got
like,
a really goofy face. And the Zambot had a fairly goofy face also, but the Daitarn's is more goofy. And I do miss the Zambot's cool half moon thing on its head, the Nobunaga helmet. So that's why the Daitarn 3 just looks doofy to me. And I mean, that is a purely subjective thing, but it never like has an identity to me, really.
Well, I guess I don't disagree. I kind of feel like the Daitarn is meant to be doofy. Like, it's supposed to be a little bit silly because I think that's what they're going for, is the show has a tongue-in-cheek energy to a lot of it. Because he's got fans is like his main weapon, and he does like little like poses and stuff like that with them. And he's just got a face. The Daitarn just says straight up a fucking human face on it. Like much more so than most of these mechas do. It's just a guy's face. And there's something about that I kind of find endearing. But I will definitely agree with you that it is, the Daitarn needs to be used sparingly because it is the thing of that it's there to deliver the sun attack at the end of the episode. Again, this is like, it's the Mobile Fighter G Gundam thing. It's also, for me, the show I have watched that does this better than anything I've ever seen is Sailor Moon, where for Sailor Moon, that show is not an action show. Like at the end of the episode when they fight the bad guy, it's not about like creating a cool elaborate action sequence. It's about the narrative threads of that episode and oftentimes the comedy of that episode coming to a head, and you get whatever your character resolution is that episode is about, and then you get, Usagi turns into Sailor Moon, she gives her big speech, Skini Kwate, Oshiyuki, and all that kind of stuff happens, and then she does her spinning moon attack, or whatever super attack it is for the season of the show, and the bad guy is defeated, and that's it. And every once in a while, you'll have a different character be in that role other than Sailor Moon. The thing with that format is not to have good action. The thing with that format is for that to be like a pillar of here's where we deliver the resolution that brings whatever the point of that story is to its climax, and then you have a very easy resolution the episode has because it's not really about action, and then you can play with it. And I think that's the thing where Daitarn, when it leans on the Daitarn for the fights, and it's like here's a big prolonged fight between the Megaborg and the Daitarn, that can get quite tedious. Sometimes when it's more comic in nature, those can be more fun. But like, yes, as like nail biting action and like tension and that kind of stuff, it's very bad at doing that with the Daitarn 3. Where it works is when it does something fun with it. It's when, Garrison's piloting the Daitarn 3. Or it's when like the enemy has control over the Daitarn, and so they're trying to like wrest control of it, but the Daitarn's doing all this crazy shit and it's like half transformed and half not. That's where the back half of the show is so much better, is because it gets very creative about how it uses the structure of the show. That it's not just the Daitarn comes out and it's the same thing every time, and it's Banjo giving the same speech with the same resolution. What's fun is when this time it's Garrison, this time it's Beauty, this time something else has happened, something weird has gone wrong. Those are the things that make it much more interesting and dynamic. But it is that opening stretch of the show gets super tedious because it is just... We are in the Daitarn after the act break in the middle, and you're in the Daitarn for like the whole second half, and it's just a big prolonged fight that is just a tedious, how do we get to him doing the sun attack? That part of the show is not good.
No, it is not. But, okay, what does it do to get better? I think, if we're thinking about where does it start to improve, and I do think it is kind of that... Episode 12 is, I think, certainly on a production visual level is a turning point, and it starts giving us some more stuff with the characters. But I really think that middle stretch, end of the teens into the early 20s, where you have so many more character interactions, you bring out the supporting cast, you bring them into episodes much more fulsomely, you have a lot of other kinds of action before you get to the robot climax. They really start varying the setting of episodes. The Meganoids get to be characters. There's like a very myriad number of improvements they really start to make.
Yes. I think for me, like, I guess one episode I want to shout out that I think is like where you get a lot of that stuff you're talking about is episode 19, which is probably my favorite of all of the kind of like big episodes. Obviously, episode 20, episode 40 are the two best. But if you're looking for like, here's just a regular ass episode of Daitarn, episode 19, which is called Operation Earth Slice, I think is the best because it's where the comedy works and all the characters work well. Because part of what I think makes a good episode of Daitarn work is when the bad guy is interesting. And so this is the one where you have this bad guy who's Commander Buncher, and he has a plan, which is he's going to literally saw the Earth into two pieces. And he's created a giant, like, snake-looking robot, but the snake is just made up of, like, 1 billion buzzsaws. And he shows a demonstration to Kotosu of, here's the Earth, and here's my thing, and it will wrap all the way around the fucking equator of the Earth and just saw the Earth in half. And then the two halves, like, are apart, like if you fucking split an orange or something. It just had the two things. It's like, and we will create our human farm on this half of the Earth, and then we will live on the other half of the Earth. And it's like the stupidest plan, but it's so funny and it's so ridiculous. And the character of Buncher, who's this like little nerd meganoid, you know, like most of the meganoids are these like big tough looking guys, and he's this little like nerdy dude. And he's got his two soldiers who are the kind of like putty soldier from Power Ranger looking motherfuckers. They're just the henchmen. And it's just him and these two dopey henchmen on the moon building their giant crazy buzzsaw machine. And then basically Banjo and the gang end up stumbling on it on the moon. I think this is the first episode where you get, this is the episode where you get Beauty's father having the space tourism thing. So they end up on the moon through that, and they fight this dude. And there's just a lot of great moments of Buncher is really well characterized. He's got his two henchmen for whom he's really affectionate. And so at a certain point, Banjo just fucking shoots those two guys who have been characters. Like, they're like, you know, proper characters of the episode. He just fucking murders them. And they have these great lines where he goes, "Oh, I can't believe we got killed so easily. Ah!" And then the bad guy just collapses to the ground. And then Buncher is incensed. He's furious that his two friends have just been murdered by Banjo. And so he then his objective now is just to full on try to kill Banjo. Obviously he fails, Banjo succeeds. But that sense of like, the bad guy has a sense of pathos. He's got something that he cares about, he's trying to do. And that's a thing that builds so much interest in the episode. It makes the action more interesting because the bad guy is characterized. It makes the comedy land really well because it's like really kind of going for those comic elements. And then it uses some of the structure of the show in a fun way where you've got, Banjo's whole thing is he yells, "Daitarn, come here!" And he summons the Daitarn, and it's Buncher and Banjo are both trying to summon the Daitarn as it's being pulled between two magnets. And so it just intercuts between them desperately louder and louder, shouting, "Daitarn, come here! No, Daitarn, come here!" And it's like getting pulled between them. Those things are really fun and interesting and dynamic. And it's like once the show gets into that area where it starts characterizing the bad guys more and finding more interest to do there, it makes the action and the comedy so much better.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that one's very fun. Honestly, another one that did this for me, Sean, where I sort of realized where the formula had improved is 2 episodes after that, 21. This is the one that has Char Aznavour himself, Ikeda Shuichi, as the Meganoid for that episode. And that one, it has like this sort of musical theme, and I just wrote in my notes like, this is what I want, because the way that episode does is there is a robot climax with the sun attack at the very end, but I feel like that episode moves itself through so many permutations of character combinations and threats like thrown by the Shuichi Ikeda character and like different like little fun, grace notes they give it, that by the time he gets in the Daitarn, I feel like I've had a nice meal and this is the dessert. And I think that is what you want out of this kind of thing. And it's episode 19 does that too, and a lot of ones in this period like figure that out.
Yeah, and I think there's just something about the Meganoids, once they land on this idea of like, the Meganoids are like, they have an obsession. Like that's, I think, kind of like the idea of the Meganoids, is that all of them have some sort of like powerful obsession that they're pursuing, whether it's their plan to saw the Earth in half, or it's their music thing, or whatever. All of them have this like particular element. There's like a kind of like 2-parter thing split across the season of those 2 episodes that are about 2 different Meganoids that are in love, and one of them's like the Frankenstein's monster-looking Meganoid. Like that kind of stuff of this idea that each of these villains are a person like possessed by some sort of intense obsession to do something or accomplish something. Some of them not even being particularly related to the notion of taking over the human race. Some of them are like, I want to be the biggest movie star in the world or whatever. That gives an anchor for those episodes. That then is the thing that forms the spine that leads into the ultimate conclusion that episode 40 pulls on with Banjo. But I think like that element with the Meganoids, just becomes so much more interesting because it gets away from it has to just be an action show, and it's more a story about this one-off character and how Banjo and the gang interface with this character and whatever their fixation is.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. And I think, yeah, like, this is not a show where you need to watch every episode of it. You could definitely, Sean can recommend, a list of, like, the ones that are the best ones to watch. But once it gets its sea legs, and I think it figures it out, there are a lot of good ones. It's always hit or miss. There's, like, no period where you just have nothing but bangers. But the ones that are good are very good. And they're definitely, I do think the key is just emphasizing the supporting cast, emphasizing the villains as characters, and minimizing the robot action. And then you have a pretty fun show on your hands.
Yeah. So let's just go through just a couple of other episodes like that stand out to us. So I've got episode 30 is one of my favorites. This is Lucian's Trojan Horse. This is one of the most famous ones.
I wrote in my notes that was my favorite one up to that point, and I think that's probably like second only to the finale to me as the best episode of the show.
Yeah. And this is one of the ones that was storyboarded by Tomino in his usual pseudonym of Onotani Minoru. Obviously, he storyboarded a lot of episodes, but this is one where you can really feel his touch because this is like the big tragedy. But this is where you have the Meganoid in this one is the Meganoid called Majoni, who's a lady Meganoid, and she only leads female soldiers. And so it's like that's kind of like the obsession or the fixation is on this sort of like, create this world of women versus the men. And she has this desire to fight Banjo one-on-one in a duel. And then you've got this sort of like parallel plot line with that, with the Lucian, the character of the title, who is a human who gets partially transformed into a Meganoid soldier. And so this is one of the only ones that really digs into the kind of like horror, the almost kind of like slight body horror element of it, of this notion of them taking humans and forcefully turning them into something they're not. And so her body is a soldier's body, but her mind is still the mind of this woman, Lucian. And so the ending of the episode is her in this like big ship, ramming it into Mazoni, the Megaborg, screaming the line out, "Give me back my body," as she explodes. And it's like a really intense, very dramatic scene. It's very Tomino in the way it depicts the action. But this is one of those that just like highlights how when you narrow in on that sort of notion of let's build out a whole pathology for the Meganoid, someone who's obsessed with like women having power and dominance to the extent where she is dominating other women to follow her, right? In the sense of her wanting to just create this sort of single gendered world, and that being this thing that enacts this total horror on this unsuspecting woman. That is a like really dynamic, interesting plot line that again is also just depicted in a super powerful way. It's also interesting because it does very prominently feature people saying the word Mokuba or Trojan horse or wooden horse over and over and over again in what is only months before Mobile Suit Gundam comes out. So like, yes. At this point, Tomino has had the notion of the white base Mokuba, the Trojan horse, that is in his head. And that is just like a little, as a Gundam fan, that is like a weird little note on that one of that it is interesting that you have this phrase of the Trojan horse right before Gundam is coming out.
Definitely. And that episode also is just phenomenal on the level of like mise-en-scène, like the beach that they're on and the way it like evokes, sort of the Trojan War, but through all the robots. I mean, that episode ends with my favorite image of the Daitarn in the whole show, which is it riding the Mokuba, the Trojan horse, like off into the sun, is great. But also it keeps Banjo out of the Daitarn for really long. And it has my favorite action scene of the whole show, which is the duel between him and the commander, what's her name? Mazoni, on the beach where they're using the spears. Like, that scene fucking kicks ass. It honestly reminded me of some of the stuff in like the Demon Horse episode of Dororo that Tomino directed.
Yes.
Just like the physicality of it. So yeah, that episode, like if you watch just one of the like pure episodic episodes of Daitarn, that's the one to watch. It's a fucking masterpiece. Yeah, love that one. If we just want to go back and forth picking a couple of episodes before we're done, another one I do want to highlight, Sean, that we kind of rushed past, but I want to give focus to is episode 12, The Golden Distant Star.
Yes.
That is the one that has... So, like, I actually think if you were just looking at it on the script level, that episode still has some pretty significant problems in that it introduces part of Haran Banjo's backstory, but not the most relevant part of the backstory. It introduces him escaping from Mars with the Daitarn, but you don't know what his family was doing on Mars that required him to do that. You don't learn that until episode 18, and it feels like it would be probably a more powerful episode if you did know that he had just been betrayed by his father and lost his family. But in any case, you do get a flashback in the B part of that episode that is mostly animated by Kaneda Yoshinori, who is an absolute legend of an animator, did a lot of Studio Ghibli animations, including starting on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and lots of other things you would know. And it has, as you say, some Star Wars references, although its overall aesthetic impact is much like darker and sadder than Star Wars, and it is just a very like impressionistic experiential version of like being lost in space and being in peril in space, and it's a very aesthetically powerful like 10 minutes of television there.
It's just it purely as like a piece of animation, it's incredible. It's also just because it's stylistically so different. It's not totally monochrome, but they pull a bunch of the color out, and it's like got this kind of gray look to it. But yeah, like some of the Star Wars stuff is, there are specific shots from the original Star Wars movie that it replicates, like the shot when C-3PO and R2-D2 are in the escape pod and it leaves the Tantive 4 at the beginning of the movie, and you have the shot from within the bay where the Tantive 4's escape pod launches out, and you see that heading towards Tatooine. There's a shot of that. There's a sequence that is very clearly inspired by the Death Star run at the end of Star Wars. And so you just get this immediate sense of like the way that space combat is depicted as these sort of like big epic World War II dogfights, but also with like space aircraft carriers around, which is kind of like what the Star Wars thing is. That's so much what that like episode is like, and it just captures that energy, as you say, for a much more darker overall tone, because it is this sort of desperate, he's trying to escape from Mars, and just it's this very intense, desperate action. So yes, that is like a really great episode, especially if you're just a fan of like classic 70s sunrise animation. Like that has some just like fucking amazing sequences in it. Another episode I want to shout out, not because I think it's a good episode, but it's an episode that I've sort of referenced a little bit. I just want to talk about a bit more. Is episode 22,
yes,
A Star Among Stars, which is just crazy. So this is by far the most peculiar episode. It's an episode that is entirely a comedy episode, but it's made up completely of references to various movies. So the plot of the episode is Banjo gets wrapped up in a plot to create a movie called quote-unquote Space Wars, out of fight between him and another Meganoid, which is the movie star, quote-unquote, Jimmy Dean. And it is full of crazy references. There are references to various movie studio logos that are made. The MGM logo's in it, the Paramount logo, the Columbia logo are all satirized. There are very stylized cameos of Hollywood actors. So like that almost, as I put in my notes, it almost looks like stuff out of like Yellow Submarine, the cartoon, where it's like, it looks like they've taken a picture and like traced it and kind of stylized it. But you've got like Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that, like famous classic Hollywood people. And there are just lots and lots of very specific references, some of them to Japanese media, one to like a series of samurai movies that at the time would have been very current, but is now super obscure, that I've seen, where there's a series of movies called Nemuri Kyoshiro, which is about a guy who's like a Japanese samurai who's like half Christian from his like mother's side or whatever, and he goes around fighting people and killing people. But he has a finishing move called the Full Moon Cut, where he takes his sword and slowly moves his sword in a circle around him, and then it's like a counter. When someone comes at him from whatever angle his sword is at, he can deliver like this one-hit kill blow. And there's a complete reference that's just a quote for like shot for shot the end of one of those movies. There's a bunch of shit like that in it, and it's just wild. The whole aesthetic of the episode's totally different. The references just come a fucking like a mile a minute. Like it's just intensely dense with visual information. And again, I don't know if I thought it was particularly interesting. Like I don't know if it's doing anything like all that funny or compelling with the references. It's just wild aesthetically and stylistically that they went for an episode like that. And it's pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's a good episode, but it's a very interesting episode. And I do like that they just called the movie star Jimmy Dean, which is just a diminutive of James Dean. Like, that's just his name. Yes. It's not like a parody of the name. That's just his name. But anyway, that's a fun one. Here's one that I actually think is very good, is episode 33, which is the episode where, I mean, most famously, it has the scene at the end where Garrison comes in to pilot the Daitarn, and he gives the little speech, and the Daitarn, its movements just become like Garrison's very polite British movements, and that piece of animation is great. But that one also has a whole, like, weird, like, they're dealing with an ancient civilization with a mysterious orichalcum orb, and all of this, like, stuff that's like, it's like there's another episode where they kind of do an Atlantis thing, but it's that kind of storytelling. But mainly that is one because Garrison is a star.
Yes, that's an amazing Garrison episode. That one's also wild because if you've seen all of Triton of the Sea, you have heard people talk about orichalcum all the time, because that's the Plato's fake metal that Atlantis uses in mythology. But that's also the sword that Triton uses in Triton of the Sea is the orichalcum sword. And so there's like a little bit of reference there. But yeah, that one's fun because the bad guy, she has this intense obsession over discovering this ancient civilization and the orichalcum and all that stuff, to the point that she ultimately turns against Kotosu at the end, and sacrifices herself to stop, so Kotosu sends a missile to try to kill Banjo, and is going to use the orichalcum, and the bad guy of that episode, the Meganoid Doyle, realizes that the orichalcum will just like destroy the world as they know it. And so she sacrifices herself to destroy the orichalcum so it never falls into Kotosu's hands. Like, so that kind of storytelling stuff just makes the episodes really dynamic, where again, like that way in which the Meganoid has this intense obsession over this particular thing that overrides all else, that overrides Kotosu's commands and everything. That was a very good Garrison episode. I want to shout out what is, I think, the best Garrison episode, which is episode 23, Scorching Flames Burn Me. Because this is the one where Banjo is captured very early in the episode by the Meganoid Genova, and she's in a big volcano base. And so it's Garrison gets called in, and he's basically the lead of the episode, because for most of the episode, Banjo's captured and Garrison has to save him. And there's this just all-time great scene where Banjo is dangling from like a rope off this flying big base or whatever, and Garrison pulls up in the car, like the cool car that Banjo has. He gets out, he stands on the roof of the car, he pulls out and like puts together a fucking sniper rifle. He puts an eye patch over one eye, pulls a single hair from his mustache and lets it go to see the direction of the wind, and fires one shot and cuts the rope that Banjo's hanging from. And it's the coolest thing. It's like a 3-minute sequence, but it's so fucking badass. And I think this is the first time in the show that they have put Garrison in that position where it's like, oh, he's like the coolest dude around. And you get that similar thing in the episode you were talking about where he's so much more effective in the Daitarn than Banjo has ever been. But you also get this here where he's just like the world's best secret agent. Like, he's the actual James Bond of the two. He's the dude who actually knows how to do this shit, and it's great.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was going to mention that one if you didn't. So those are really all the ones other than like episode 20 and 40 that we mentioned, and I think we need to talk a little more about 40 before we're done, that I want to talk about. Are there any others you wanted to highlight before we move on?
There's like a couple of weird ones. There's the one, I just want to mention it because it just stood out to me as one of the very strange ones. It's 26, I Am Me, You Are Melina.
Yes.
Great title. This is the one that I was mentioning early that like weirdly sexualizes beauty. So this one is, my plot description is Banjo infiltrates Meganoid Melina's camp where she's controlling humans, including Reika, Beauty, and Topo, to build a giant floating pyramid. So it's like this whole slave camp of people she is like mentally dominated. And there is like a weird dominatrix sort of like vibe to the episode where at the end she like when she turns into the giant Megaborg version, she like mentally dominates the Daitarn and makes it kneel at her feet, and she puts her foot on its head, which is like a weirdly sexualized.
It's not a vibe. It's all BDSM. They're all in leather. There's a domination and submission going on here. It's you wrote in your notes that this episode was probably a sexual awakening for many Japanese kids in the 70s. It definitely was. There's whipping, there's step on me, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. But the other weird thing about this is Beauty is drawn like incredibly off model throughout this episode. And there's a sequence in the middle of the episode that like so heavily sexualizes her in a very strange way because she's in rags throughout it. And the way she's drawn is very sexualized. And there's a shot where like straight up her top slips down, and it's like, it's like blink and you miss it. It's like literally like a handful of frames, but straight up her top falls down and like you can see her nipples. I think you see her butt crack in the episode. It's like really weird, mostly because she has not been sexualized that way at all in any other episode. Again, the most other stuff she sexualizes, like occasionally a shot starts on her butt or something and then it like pans up or something. But you don't get this like her in rags and you see her breasts, like bare breasts even for like a couple of frames. It's very weird. And she's drawn a like strangely off model the whole time. And then also there's a dominatrix in it. It's just it's a very, very strange episode. That I just, just wanted to put it out there. If you want to see a weird ass episode of Daitarn, 26 is one to look out for if you want to.
Definitely. And you definitely like off tone too, just given that this is much more of a kid friendly show in all sorts of ways. So
yes.
Yeah.
But I think that's there's obviously like a lot of other episodes that fun little parts, but I don't know if there's another one that I need to shout all the way out.
Well, one thing I wanted you to talk about, because I actually didn't watch these ones, but you did, is there's a number of episodes that are Tomino the Weaver at his loom,
yes.
as you wrote in your notes. That was such a good turn of phrase, I didn't want to steal it, Sean. You wrote Tomino the Weaver at his loom. But there are several episodes that, following up on our conversation with Zambot, where Zambot has a famous episode that is made of recycled footage, but is not a clip show. He does this several times in Daitarn as well.
Yes, there's 2 episodes. It's episode 13, Megaborgs All Around. They're not trying to hide it with that episode title at all. And then the other one is episode 34, Mecha One After Another. So again, they're very open with what these are. But these are, like Zambot 3, they are totally original episodes. So it's not a recap episode or whatever. But they are original episodes with original story. But the majority of the episode is made up of compiled footage cut together from a range of previous episodes. Basically with it always being contextualized as they have made like clones of or like a mindless version of the various foes they have defeated up to this point. I do think it's very funny that the first one is so early. It's just episode 13. So they don't have a huge number of different things to pull from. But I will say, having watched those episodes, they're not good. Like, I wouldn't recommend you go see them. But like, if you're going to watch episodes of Daitarn 3, those would be the last ones to watch. If you want to skip episodes, those would be the first ones you skip. But they are way more successful at what they're trying to do than the Zambot episode is, partially because I don't get the impression that these were just sort of like foisted upon the production out of nowhere, which is kind of what happened with Zambot. I think this is purely just a practical measure of, this is a 40 episode long show, we got to do something. Either you make a shit episode that has terrible animation like your Cuckoo's Doan's Island from the original Gundam, or you do a recap episode or something, but you have to do something to manage what like the production load here. And these are like shockingly well done, because I think if you had not seen the episodes that they are pulling footage from, you might not realize that that's what's happening. I don't think that's true of Zambot. I think that Zambot episode, it's like blatantly apparent, partially because like the whole structure of that episode is completely different than any other episode of Zambot, where the main characters aren't even the ones in the fucking robot. But in this one, they contextualize it enough and they give enough of a justification of it's like a boss rush. And it would be, I think, a tedious episode in the sense of there's just a lot of action one after another, because that's basically what the episode is. But like if Tomino did have this like, mysterious epithet of Tomino the Weaver that you talked about coming from that one like manga, I guess not biopic, but whatever, like bio manga of the making of Gundam. If that was a real phrase he had, I could understand it from these episodes, because as a feat of editing, they are like hugely impressive, because it's better than I've ever seen this thing done. And I've watched a lot of kaiju movies that have done this shit. I've seen Zambot 3 do this shit. These 2 episodes, particularly actually, honestly, it's the first one, episode 13, that I remember being the better of the 2, partially because I think it has to be more creative because it has less footage to lean on. It's an impressive feat of editing, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And obviously it's something that, editing is so core to Tomino's entire style and will become more so later on, and I'm guessing those are relevant to that. But I think we need to talk about the finale, Sean. I think we need to talk about episode 40. Banjo Vanishes at Dawn. Just a great title. It's funny, like, one way you can tell this is kind of the best episode is that your plot description is by far the longest. It's like the most incident heavy. But that's not the only thing. Like, we already talked about like the way it kind of contextualizes Banjo as a character, and you can speak more to that as well, Sean. But one thing I just wanted to highlight is I think like The staging and animation of this episode is extraordinary. This episode does, I think, indicate that it's a little darker and heavier by having a very different style of animation, where this is a fairly sketchy series to begin with, because it's the 70s and, all of that. But this one really goes heavily on the amount of like pencil lines on the characters. There's a lot more heavy cross-hatching on their designs. There's shots where they just kind of take the color away and let it just be these sketched versions of their character outlines.
Yeah.
Tomino wrote this episode. He did not apparently storyboard it. Oh, no, he did.
That's actually a mistake in this, because there were 2 storyboarders on this one.
Okay.
And so when I copied this over to the notes, that got messed up.
Okay.
So he was one of the 2 storyboarders for it. He did not write the script, though I suspect he probably wrote a lot of the dialogue.
Yes, I think he did, right? Yes. It's such Tomino dialogue. Yes. But anyway, the storyboarding, that actually makes sense, Sean, because it feels very Tomino to me. I was going to say, if he didn't have the credit, he clearly did some of the storyboarding. But yeah, like the visual aspects of this episode are arresting in a way that, while there are other episodes that I think do some very good visual stuff, this is at a cut above anything else in the show.
Yes. So just to be clear on the credits for this one, because again, there was making my notes. So it is Onatani Minoru, which is Tomino, is a storyboarder, and then also Fujiwara Doji is the other storyboarder. So because this episode has a lot going on, because it has all the action on Mars, it also has all the action in space, and so it makes sense to me that there's an extra storyboarder on there. And then it's written by the main writer of the series, which is Araki Yoshihisa, is the scriptwriter. Though again, I suspect that, as with a lot of Tomino productions, that a lot of the actual dialogue is his, which is a kind of an open secret about a lot of his things, and you can feel his hand on the brush or whatever for the dialogue in this. But yeah, the aesthetic of the episode, the storyboarding, the pacing of it, like all of those things just are like pure Tomino, and just like how stuffed it is. I mean, there's a reason why I've got a huge thing in my notes here for the plot, because just so much happens. In fact, I'm just going to read it out just for like this conversation, because it's so dense compared to all the other episodes. So Kodos sets Mars on a course to Earth to finish the fight with Banjo once and for all. We learn that Don Sauser has been comatose the entire time, that Kodos has been leading the Meganoids on her own. That's like the first 3 minutes of the episode. Banjo and the gang launch into space to fight the Meganoid fleet, and Banjo lands on Mars. He confronts and defeats Kodos, but she awakens Don Sauser, who attacks Banjo. Banjo struggles in the Daitarn, but upon hearing his father's voice, Banjo rises in anger and defeats the Don, blowing up the base and sending Mars back. On Earth, the gang departs the mansion with Garrison locking the gate, but the camera lingers at a distance on the mansion with a single light illuminating a window as the dawn slowly breaks.
Yeah, and it just, like, definitely Zambot, its last set of episodes feels very prototypical of Gundam endings and later Tomino show endings, in that it's a big battle in space, and it's all out and all this stuff. And it's obviously a lot of people die. It feels very similar to Zeta Gundam. But this episode in particular feels like the prototype for all of his finales. Like, there is something about the way it packs a lot in. It combines climax with denouement. It does not separate those out. It really puts those together. And as you were hinting earlier, Sean, it has this kind of ambiguous ending that really reminds me of... There's 2 things. There is the final moment that Banjo has with Kodos, where he says something to the effect of, "I'm so tired of this. I'm so sick of this." That reminds me so much of the end of Victory Gundam. There's something about, like, the last appearance of the villain in Victory Gundam when she comes in blind and like, that last scene. There's something about the, like, wretchedness of it. But then the final scene of everybody leaving, Garrison is tapping his toe and singing 1, 2, 3, but then you see there's still a light on in the Lonely Mansion. That feels a lot like Turn A Gundam to me. This episode just feels like this is where he cracks a code for how to end shows. And Tomino is better at ending shows than basically anyone else who's ever done this. So it's a big episode.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. And for me, like, a big thing is just how it finds this heart of the character of Haran Banjo that is so powerful. Because to me, like, a big part of what this episode does is it makes it very clear this duality that has always been there in the show, that I felt in a couple of episodes, but the show never shined a light on, which is... At this point, they have become very clear at the characterization of that the Meganoids are, by becoming Meganoids, they've abandoned their humanity. And what that means is that they both can't grow and change and they also are like obsessed or fixated on one specific thing. It's that sense of obsession is something they have, and it's their lack of humanity means they can't grow beyond what they are. And this episode makes it clear that the thing that it is saying is that Banjo is the exact same way. That Banjo's hatred for the Meganoids so dominates his life that he has become like them. And there have been lots of moments throughout the series where the Meganoids comment on this, where they comment on like Banjo does some feat that seems humanly impossible, and they're like, how, like, you must be a Meganoid, or how could you not be a Meganoid? It's like, how can you be a human and do this thing? And he does it a couple of times in this episode as well, and you get similar comments from the bad guys. And I think here it's like you get the sense of that he is superhuman in some of those ways where he performs these superhuman feats. Like in the previous episode, he breaks these shackles, like metal shackles that he's in order to save Beauty, and he just like rips them apart, which is obviously like a feat of superhuman strength. But you get the sense of here that it is because he is driven with the same kind of incredible obsession that the Meganoids are, and in many ways he is like the ultimate form of what the Meganoids are trying to be. And we could come back to this because I think there's also a big connection to new types in Gundam with this. But I just want to read the dialogue here from this exchange with Banjo and Kodos after he defeats Kodos in the fight, and you get this really amazing back and forth between them that I just think is so incredibly written. Where it starts.
You want me to play one of the characters, Sean?
Sure. If you want to do Kodos, so she starts us off.
Okay. Banjo, why can't you understand what's in the Dawn's heart?
I hate my father that created these cyborgs. I can't forgive that he took my mother, my brother, used them for his experiments and ended up killing them. You and the Dawn drown in your conceit of being superhuman. I hate it all.
In a world where humanity goes out into space, the Dawn's philosophy is correct.
You're a good example, Kodos. Your feelings for Don Sauser, the only thing you hold in your heart is that love. You've become a Meganoid who can think of nothing else.
Because loving him is my whole life.
All of you. All you do is confront me bearing my father's ghost on your backs.
That last line, Jesus Christ, it's so good. You also, your translation is much better than the fan subs I was watching, which was more kind of utilitarian. You put the poetry back in that is very much there in the Japanese, in the way he says these things. That scene is outstanding.
There's just something like this, like the Tomino touch to me with this is that like Banjo's not talking to Kodos in the scene, right? Like she responds to him with these little like jabs with like, in a world where humanity goes out into space, the Dawn's philosophy is correct, which is a total Gundam line. Like this is someone yelling that at Amuro about Char, in like Char's counterattack or some shit. But like Banjo's responses to her have nothing to do with what she's saying, and that like becomes very clear in that last line, which is so powerful, of him saying, all you do is confront me bearing my father's ghost on your backs. Where it's like, I think that's where you just get the sense of he's in this like such a dark place that he can't actually engage in Kodos with this like kind of debate she wants to have about the value of the Meganoids, which is super Gundam. It's like you start to get in this episode the sense of, oh, it is kind of the new type idea. It is that like Don Sauser, whoever the fuck he was, wanted to use this technology of cyborgs that Banjo's father created for this world where humans are starting to go out and to explore into space, and that we need to change. We need to become something more than human in order to meet this new era. And that, of course, the exact same thing with new types in Gundam is what that new thing, that new form of humanity becomes is something that can then be used as a weapon of domination and control and all these things. And this struggle of like our great potential versus the reality of how that potential is used and abused by the actual people who live in this world. And like Banjo is so consumed by these same things that he is putting on the Meganoids, right? He tells her that the only thing you hold in your heart is that love. You've become a Meganoid, you can think of nothing else. But of course, he himself, the only thing he can think of is his hatred for the Meganoids. That's the only thing he has in his heart. He can't have a relationship with these other characters, with Beauty and Reika, any of that. None of them can enter it the way that his desire for revenge and all those things do. And then that last line, all you do is confront me bearing my father's ghost on your backs. Later in the episode, when shortly after that, he confronts Don Sauser, and in the climax of that fight, he hears the voice of his father come in and tell him, like, gives him advice being like, that Don Sauser has only been revived for a moment by Kodos's love. Like, if you just hold out, you will be able to survive this and get through this. And then Banjo stands up and says, is that supposed to be an apology to me, Father? This is my strength. This is my strength alone. This is just my strength. I'm not going to borrow your power, Father. And then he gives his line, I borrow the power of the sun to deliver this final blow, the Hisatsu, the sun attack, and that defeats the enemy. But, like, who is bearing the ghost of his father on his shoulders more than fucking Haran Banjo? And there's just that sense of this is like the Tomino that I think we've been waiting to get to, between watching, me watching all of Triton of the Sea, us watching like the Astro Boy stuff, watching Zambot 3, that you get the visions of it. But this like sense of the really rich character psychology that is informing who these people are, what they're doing, and it coming out in this just incredibly crackling dialogue in these dense, powerful scenes with incredible moments, and all of this being delivered in one episode that also has like an extended action scene in space where all the other characters get a cool moment in their big action scene in space and fighting the bad guys. You also have a whole big fight after this with the Daitarn 3. You have a big elaborate fight, a multi-stage fight before this with Haran Banjo crashing on Mars, fighting the soldiers, fighting Kodos, and then you have a whole denouement with all the shit with the mansion. That all of this can exist in a single episode of anime. This is the episode where it feels like we're here at like Mobile Suit Gundam level. Tomino has finally arrived.
He could only make the first episode of Gundam, which, as we've said many times, packs in 5 episodes worth of stuff for any other show after he'd done this finale, right? Like, yes. That is the context. And the other thing to say is the way he deals with the idea of a tonal twist here. Because one of the things we've been following this season is that his first show, Triton of the Sea, ends with, as you've described before, this crazy ending where we learn that Triton was committing a horrible genocide all along. But of course, it's a twist that comes so outside of the character's actual experience that all the character can kind of do is shrug and go, well, that was weird, and then move on with his life.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then Zambot 3 is better about all of that, and it does some better characterization with its main character and all of that stuff. But when you get to the ending, it also attempts to do a twist like this, where it becomes about the evils of humanity, and the villain is this, these robots who come to Earth because Earth is unsavable and all that stuff. But again, the problem is that is so external to what the main character has experienced. It comes so outside of anything he could ever understand that it's a twist without much impact. It's a twist that is thematically relevant to Zambot in a way that I think Triton wasn't. But it feels like something that had to be delivered at the midpoint of the show as a twist, not at the very end.
Yes.
And here with Daitarn, he finally squares that circle because there is no narrative twist here, other than maybe that Korosu has been kind of puppeteering Don Zauther, but that also feels like the groundwork has been laid over many episodes to get there. The twist, if there is one, is really it's a reframing of how we see Haran Banjo, because we finally get a sense of how Haran Banjo sees himself. And that is the best kind of like ending twist denouement you can do, because it makes you, as I said earlier, want to go back and rewatch the show knowing that about Banjo. Because it isn't the show fundamentally changing. It isn't some new piece of information coming in and surprising Banjo. It is entirely about realizing how broken and lonely and sad he is inside, that his last line of the show is looking down at the dead Korosu and going, Boku wa iya da. I'm fucking done with it. Like, that's basically what this is, right? And that is like this intense sadness, but it feels like a very earned sadness, not a surprise, you were doing a genocide, Triton. You should think more about that next time. Next time you fight the bad guys, but the show is over now, so no time to reflect on it. Instead, it feels like, yes, this is a substantial reframing of what we've seen so far, but it uses what we've seen so far. And so when he says that last line, and when everybody leaves and we are meant to infer that he is now alone in his mansion being sad, there's a punch to it that you would not have expected Daitarn 3 to deliver earlier in the show. And again, that is the Tomino touch.
Yeah, and it's something where, like, I still think the show would have been much better if it had been much clearer with its setting and all that stuff early on. But there is an interesting effect that is had by the way in which that sort of like ungrounded, kind of uncertain feeling you have through the show, that again is like true all the way through the ending. Because again, like, exactly who and what the fuck Don Sauser is never particularly clear. Again, my main theory was going to be that it was his dad the whole time, because also, take note, Hadan Sozo, Don Sauser, very similar sounding names, but again, I don't think that it's supposed to be it's his dad in any way, shape, or form. Although Kodos, there is the one episode where Banjo has the flashbacks where he hears his mom's voice, and the mom is voiced by the same actress as Kodos. Now, the actress who plays Kodos also plays like 10 other characters over the course of the series, so that could be an entire coincidence. But there's you can maybe do your Freudian shit if you want to with this. Obviously, Hadan Banjo has a lot of issues involving his family. But like, I guess the thing I was trying to get to is that you have this sort of unhinged quality, this sense of you're not really anchored in the show. That's true throughout all the way to the ending. But then in this last moment, you just get this like brilliant insight into this guy you've just watched 40 episodes of anime about, who has been like a cool character, informed by a really great character design and a really great central voice performance, but has been, a fairly generic hero character, who, has his like, he's driven by revenge and he has his anger, but he also is a bit of a womanizer, and he's got his like kind of comic bits, and he's a bit of a straight man, amongst all the madness that happens around him. And it's a good character, but it's not a character that I think you would describe as having substantial psychological depth to them, like an Amuro Ray or a Shara Aznable. And then in this last moment, you just see this like, oh, there's so much more to his psychology. There's so much more to like what his quest for revenge has done to this man, that all those other moments have just been like hiding. And then this last moment where he has come to this planet and brutally killed this lady Kodos, a woman who he says the only thing she has in her heart is love, and he's brutally killed this lady. Obviously, the Meganoids are doing bad shit, but that he can't find some way to resolve this other than to kill this woman who is not the person who killed his mom. Who's not the person who killed his dad or brother, right? His dad did all that shit. She is just another person turned into a Meganoid. There's just an emptiness with what he accomplishes here, that when he looks down on Mars and he looks at Kodos' corpse and he says, Boku wa yada, like, I don't want this. I mean, it's such a vague Japanese phrasing. Boku wa yada is like something you would say if like someone, you could say if someone asked you like, hey, do you want, ketchup on this? And you're like, boku wa yada. Like, no, I don't, right? Like, it can be a very casual phrase, but it's this just sense of, like, rejection, but it's so vague what he's rejecting to. It uses just the sort of, like, contextual grammar of Japanese so effectively to give this, like, powerful moment.
The meaning of the sentence is entirely contained in Suzuoki's delivery. Like, yes. It's one of those sentences that, like, if you are a translator, like doing the subtitles, you couldn't translate it from the script. You have to hear him say it to figure out what you're going to put down. And, like, and that makes it a very good piece of writing, because that's Tomino knowing what Suzuoki can do and what the moment needs to say. And the verbiage is a lot less important than the emotions behind it.
Yeah, like, honestly, like, a moment it reminds me of a lot is, in a much later thing, but obviously something informed by Tomino tremendously, is Anno in End of Evangelion, the end of that movie where Asuka is strangling Shinji and she says Kimochiwari, and that's like the last line of that movie or whatever. It has like a similar kind of like, it's using that sort of context-free Japanese phrasing to deliver this really powerful gut punch of the, like, there's a lot you can read into what she's trying to say there. And I like this even more personally because it's it does have all the baggage that fucking Evangelion has here. And it's just like such a great moment. And the fact that you don't see Hadan Banjo again, you see like the fucking thing on Mars gets blown up. And it's also important to point out how cool the whole idea of the episode is, that she's just trying to crash Mars into the fucking Earth, which is a great evil plan that is also, obviously this is a very Gundam bad guy, Char trying to drop Axis on the Earth and all that kind of shit. Tomino bad guys love dropping giant shit on the Earth. And it's interesting that Kodos was going to drop the biggest thing of all of them, Mars. Very ambitious lady. But he blows up the engine, sends Mars back to its orbit. You see the Daitarn in space. And then that's the last intimation you get of Hadan Banjo, other than this very ominous, suggestive moment of everybody leaving the mansion. I love the tone of all the characters, that they are not, like, burdened with this incredible sadness. There's, like, this acceptance that it's time for them to move on, because they are humans. Like, they can grow, they can change. They're not fixated or pinned down to this one thing. It's time for them to forget and move on to the next phase of their lives. And Garrison leaves. He locks the mansion doors. He locks the mansion gate, turns back in the rain for a moment, puts up his umbrella, taps his foot. 1, 2, 3, Daitarn 3, you get the opening theme playing. We will revisit this conversation when we get to Overman King Gainer, because Overman King Gainer has a very similar dynamic as its ending with the opening theme. And then this shot, this very long, distant shot on the manor with this little light in just one of the windows as the dawn comes up. That sense of all these other people have gone on with their lives. They can go on with their lives. But Hadan Banjo can't, that he will always be in that manor because whatever it is that was taken from him, is not something he can never get back. And that maybe this quest for revenge against the Meganoids was not ever the thing he needed to do as a person. And it's something that turned him into the things that he was trying to fight. And it's like, those are like themes that you get in a lot of these kinds of stories of that, like, it's your Batman story about like, if you cross the line, you'll be what you're trying to fight. It's all that. It's that Nietzsche quote about be careful of staring into the abyss, all that kind of shit. But it's delivered so poetically and so elegantly here and so beautifully because it's not what you think it's going to be about. You don't think it's going to be that kind of revenge story until it is that kind of revenge story at the very end. And I think that's something that makes that message so much more impactful than it is in other kind of media I've seen do this.
Totally. I mean, the other thing to say here that I think aligns with everything you're laying out here, Sean, is that at no point does Haran really want to kill the Meganoids. He wants to kill his dad. He wants to fucking fight his father, and he wants to have a reckoning with the dad who killed his brother and his mother, and he wants to be able to say all the things he was never able to say, but his dad's gone. And so all he's got left is the Meganoids. And this is where I do think there would be more power in, like, if we had known the role his dad played from the beginning and we could spend a little more time in that. But even not having that, it is so clear. Like, when Koros is lying dead and he's standing over her in the Daitarn, like, I'm still not satisfied because I never got to do the thing I actually wanted to do. And I never will. And, like, there's that emptiness is expressed so beautifully.
Yeah, and it's just what a wild way to end a show that, as we recall, the first episode is about the Meganoids attacking a beauty pageant, and it's like you have all these supermodels in bikinis on jetpacks, which is totally an idea that he just uses again in that wild episode of Victory Gundam, where all the ladies are in swimsuits and jetpacks to try to confuse the main character Uso's virgin mind and to try to like disrupt his thinking or whatever. But you have that here in a much more positive way of them fighting alongside the Daitarn. And the first episode ends with the Daitarn 3 flying towards the camera with a heart made out of bikini supermodels in jetpacks. An image so powerful that I immediately screenshotted it and put it at the top of my notes because I'm like, I could never forget that this is how this show started because it's amazing. And that ends with a lingering shot of a rain-covered mansion with a single light at the break of dawn with our main character invisible to us. We don't know what state he's in or anything, but we can only read in that he is a man who is like so broken that everybody else has to leave him to move on with their lives. It's like, what a fucking journey that is. Like, this show has gone some fucking places when you get to episode 40.
But what a characteristically Tomino journey, Sean.
Yes.
And what a great way to segue into one of the main events. Next week, we will be talking about the big one, Mobile Suit Gundam.
Yes, but Jonathan, I thought we already did a podcast on Mobile Suit Gundam.
We've done many podcasts on Mobile Suit Gundam. So what we're going to do here and what we're going to do with future Gundam installments is, because obviously Tomino directs all these Gundam shows also that we've already covered, but we also feel like it would be weird to just jump from, in this case it would be Daitarn into Ideon, and it's kind of hard to talk about Ideon going from Daitarn when in the middle Gundam happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to still do an episode. Sean and I are not going to we might rewatch some things, but we're not going to rewatch the entire show, in part because we've all seen Gundam 79 many times. But we're going to talk about it
because we want this podcast series to eventually be able to come out.
Yes, we do. But anyway, we're gonna do what we normally do in terms of the history, talking about the cast and crew, all of that stuff. And I'm still thinking about how we might put these episodes together fully, but we'll have at least a conversation about where this show fits in the overall Tomino kind of oeuvre oeuvre and discourse. And if you guys want to rewatch the shows along the way and use those as listening guides, you can have them. And of course, our old Weekly Suit Gundam discussions of each of those shows is out there for you to listen to. But we still want to have these kind of in sequence so that we can represent the full Tomino story. And I think just for us, Sean, it's good to be able to stop for a second, pause, think about Gundam, think about the history before we move on to the next full thing we're watching, which is Ideon. And I think that'll be useful.
Yes, and I think that will be very good because I did buy these books, and like half of each of them is just Gundam because it's like half of Tomio's career. So it would
nice.
Suck for me to buy the books and not be able to use most of what they're about.
All right, well, that'll be next week. For now, I'm going to go, think about Hanan Banjo and what a great name it is, and just, I hope the dude's okay, because he deserves the best.
Yeah, I'm just going to be over here trying to figure out how I will be able to survive.
信じほど美しい時代な